Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 19th meeting of the Morro Bay General Plan Advisory Committee. Let the record reflect that two of our members are absent, but we do have a quorum, and the meeting is called to order. We will begin our meeting, as is our custom, with a moment of silence, please. Thank you. And if you will all rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. We do have a little bit of special business to take care of this afternoon. One of our members, Red Davis, has been demoted by the citizens of Morro Bay to the City Council, and so we need to elect a new vice chairman this afternoon. So, do we have any volunteers or nominations?
Chair Teft, I think we probably have to do the nominations for both chair and vice chair because we're into the new year. I didn't actually think about that before we talked about it, but we probably need to do both.
Terrific. Let's do chairman first then. Any nominations for chairman or volunteers for chairman? Even better.
That was a huge surprise.
Yeah. Okay, so I do hear myself being nominated, but anyone else who would be interested, or anyone else who would like to put another name in? Okay, then I guess I'll ask all those in favor of my continuing in this position, say aye. Aye. Opposed? You don't get to vote, Scott. Okay, then moving on to vice chair, we will need to switch gears on the vice chair because Brett is not here. Any nominations? Any thoughts?
I would like to nominate Susan Stewart.
You were serious.
Is that agreeable to you, Susan? Very good.
Just
okay.
Here every
Okay, so we have one nomination. Any others? Then can those in favor of electing Susan Schneider to be our vice chair, please say Stewart. I'm sorry.
And she could fill in. It's the same name.
And it's both the same initials, you know. Okay, Susan Stewart for vice chairman, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Very good. Then we will move on to announcements. Are there any announcements from any members of the GPAC? Glenn.
Yes, I do have one. The Morro Bay Open Space Alliance is sponsoring a public workshop on these issues a week from today at 6:30. We're going to be in this room. We'll be talking about very similar things. You may get your fill of it tonight if you stay long enough. If not, show up at 6:30 then, and we'll go through this in a more discussion-oriented format for everybody to give feedback into this process from the public.
Good, great. Any other announcements? I would like to note that the next public workshop for the downtown waterfront specific plan and the general plan is scheduled for February 2nd at 5:30, I believe, at the Vets Hall.
No.
No, at this location. Okay. right here. So, great.
And this one.
Maybe. So if there are no other announcements, then we do actually have a presentation scheduled this evening from the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. May I introduce?
Yes.
Thank you. Janet Gibson, who is the vice chair of the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance, has agreed to come and give a brief overview of our position on some of these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. So yes, I represent the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance, otherwise known as MABOSA. As the vice chair, and this is some of our viewpoints on some issues that are being discussed here. So just to give you a little background, Morro Bay Open Space Alliance is a nonprofit volunteer organization whose mission is the protection of open space, not surprisingly, through education and action. So we represent their position on some of the open space issues that are being raised here today in the study areas 1, 2, 3, and 4 in your packet. City staff, consultants with Michael Baker International and the General Plan Advisory Committee have discussed the planning area, sphere of influence, and annexation as all policy tools for management of parcels on or near the boundaries of the city. MBI has identified 4 of these study areas of potential interest to Morro Bay, including Study Area 1, which includes much of the property owned by Chevron in the Toro Creek Valley. Chevron is currently seeking adjustments to some of these partial lot lines to prepare them for sale and is currently marketing others. The parcels in question include areas in the city's viewshed, areas that contain environmentally sensitive habitats, undeveloped land zoned for agriculture, mostly grazing, buffer zones between Morro Bay and neighboring developed areas such as Cayucas, and some actively managed prime agricultural parcels. All of these parcels are currently governed by land use plans and ordinances of the San Luis Obispo County, and many of them are within the coastal zone. MABOSA's general objective for these parcels is clear. Land use and zoning should recognize the highest and best use for them is for open space, with development limited to facilitating passive human use consistent with habitat preservation. Agricultural uses, including grazing, may be appropriate for this framework. However, the intention in the city's proposal to change land use of study areas 2, 3, and 4 to open space recreation is preferred. Specifically, MABOSA recommends that the city should use the policy tools it has to maintain open space in these parcels. The question is, which policy tools and which uses of them can best achieve this goal? As an organization, we recommend 1, we seek to extend the city's sphere of influence only for the parcels in the viewshed above North Morro Bay. So these are the parcels that are immediately adjacent to the city limits. And on your maps, it would be Chevron's parcels 33, 34, 36, 38, 40, and 41. So this darker hatched area right in here. Very specifically, we need to include provisions in the memorandum of agreement that we must do with LAFCO to maintain current agricultural zoning of these parcels. According to MBI baseline assessment, landslide and other geologic hazards in this area are high to very high, so development should be minimized here. So for 2, would be to include the remaining study areas in the planning area with a suggested land use designation of open space recreation. So this is as proposed, which leaves them under the county management at this time. you'll note that the part of study area 1 that we would hope would remain in the county and not in an SOI, sphere of influence, includes Chevron parcel 6, at least east of the highway. As you know, Chevron's parcel 6 is split into 3 different pieces here, but the majority of it is east of the highway. So 6, 7, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then down here is 35. So that yellowish hatched area in there. And so 3, work with the county, the Coastal Commission, the Conservation Community, and the Cayucas CSD to ensure that the open space separator between Morro Bay and Cayucas is maintained with no substantial residential, commercial, or industrial land uses permitted. So that means that we are opposed to alternative 2 here and prefer to maintain the open space as it exists between the 2 communities. Now, in the Toro Creek Valley, which is study area 1, representatives of Chevron have made presentations to at least 2 meetings of the GPAC regarding the over 3,000 plus acres in and around the Toro Creek Valley. They have stated that they intend to sell these parcels and have already sold at least 3 of them, and that they do not intend to act as a developer themselves. They have encouraged the City of Morro Bay and GPAC to consider using the SOI or annexation to incorporate parts of this area within the scope of the city's formal responsibility. However, at least 2 factors make this questionable. 1, annexation is currently not feasible for most of these properties, as it would apply a service provision the city cannot afford. No potential new revenues would exceed the costs, so that should be dropped from consideration. Number 2, extending the sphere of influence implies under the LAFCO policies, including state-level statutes, that the city is committed to a development plan within a 20-year time frame as incorporated in a memorandum of agreement. Extending Morro Bay's sphere of influence to include these Chevron parcels beyond those in the viewshed implies service support, as stated above, that would not benefit the city and then would also encourage severe development pressure. So Mimbosa recognizes that carefully planned development will and should occur to meet human needs. This would include infill housing development in the city, as well as potential recreation development, such as trails, bike paths, picnic areas, campgrounds, in the open space surrounding the city. Any general plan going forward must include land use designation and tools to allow the city residents to retain the sense of place so many of them cherish. As the vision and values workshop showed, residents value the natural beauty of Morro Bay very highly, and we wish to maintain that. Development in these areas should be designed to improve the experience of open space, and the general plan is the appropriate place to stipulate this kind of development. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that input. And along those lines,
Is your microphone on, sir?
Oh, yes. Do you have any questions?
and along those lines, then, this is a public hearing, and we have come to our public comment period. So we would love to invite any members of the public who would like to speak on really anything before the committee. Please come forward. We'd love to hear from you.
Hello, I'm Ed Griggs. I live at 539 Whidbey Street, and I like maps. I'm a graduate forester, surveyor, park ranger, and I've spent a good deal of my life looking at maps. And I'd like for you to review, if you would, some map that I've taken from the existing general plan and the more recent iterations.
Thank you.
Sometime in September or December. Okay, if you would look with me at the first map is a copy of the existing general plan. And if you'll look down at the legend that says residential, and it shows all of these density types. And first of all, if you look at medium density, it calls for 7 to 15, up to 15 homes per acre. And medium low density, which is just above that, calls for 4 to 7. Now, if you look right above the edge of the bottom of this, there's a really tight stippling that represents medium density. And as you go up to the Morro Bay jet fuel tank farm, it shows a different density. And it's a little bit ambiguous. It looks as though it's low medium, which calls for 4 to 7 houses. Now, if you turn to the next page and look at the current plan, it shows that the area of the jet fuel tanks is medium. But that's confusing because it's based, that map, it says that it's based on the existing general plan. And the existing general plan calls for 4 to 7. In other words, R1. And now it's bumped up to R2. So and I refer to a particular quote in the recent Plan Morro Bay, and it's at the top of the page, on the second page, just below the colored map. It says, and this is from figure 7.12, presents the map of the existing general plan and use designation. So it's based, this map, this sentence says that this map is based on that map, the old map. And that's an inconsistency in that. Now, presently, at this very moment in time, it's R1. And I, for one, recommend that it stay that way. And as I'm just going to read the rest of this. As the present Morro Bay plan is, it seems to be erroneously represented to be based on the existing general plan. I believe that the present R1 designation should be maintained. Though the R1 designation on this property will severely impact the already overburdened infrastructure, the existing infrastructure is incapable of sustaining the proposed R2 designation. Furthermore, the R2 density in the former jet fuel terminal will adversely impact, one, the carbon emission protocols by adding twice the number of cars, noise pollution from the cars, and noise from more people. Two, light pollution by requiring more street lights, house lights, outdoor lighting, etc. Three, wildlife diversity by increasing the density of houses and therefore the numbers of people. Increasing the risk of mass wasting in an area designated as unstable in the geological section of the LCP. 5, the R2 designation will increase pressure on the Blue Line Creek in the Esha on that property and will impact the quality of life in the neighborhood within the zone of influence. We all treasure the quiet, low-key atmosphere of our wonderful neighborhood. And I hope that you will entertain seriously the maintenance of the R1 designation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak this afternoon?
My name's Richard Dorflinger. I live on Tahiti Street, and I've read that a guiding principle of the planning division is, and I quote, that all new development fit into the small town scale of the community while preserving and strengthening the unique small coastal town image and character of Morro Bay. I personally don't see how the proposed development complies with this principle, and I hope that those who are responsible for making decisions will keep this principle front and center in their minds. Thank you.
Anyone else? Go for it.
Good evening. My name is Victor Montgomery, and I'm here this evening on behalf of Chevron. Dave Fitzpatrick was unable to make it this evening, so I'm here in his place. And I also have Kim Tillage is here with me. She's from Chevron as well. First, I'd like to say I appreciate being able to have the dialogue with the committee. We have appreciated your willingness to listen to us and look at our maps and talk with us about what's going to happen with the Chevron property. And we want to thank the staff and their consultants for the alternatives they developed that are in your package for today's discussion. We've told you before, and we're continuing to have conversations with the city and the county and conservancy agencies about the future of this property. And those discussions are about all of the remainder of the Chevron ownership there, as well as the lots along the frontage with the city of Morro Bay. So in the alternatives that were presented, we've got some questions about them. We appreciate the level of effort that went into thinking about them. In particular on alternative one, we have some questions about the area that is light green and has orange hatching over it, which is this. It appears to us that is talking about moving the sphere of influence out away from the existing city limits to encompass the first tier of lots along Panorama Drive, as well as the next tier of lots behind those. And that they would be designated as open space. So it's unclear to us what would be allowed to happen on those lots that were designated as open space under the city's jurisdiction. What are the allowable uses in the open space category in the city? What I would point out is those lots are existing lots with certificates of compliance issued by the county, so they are existing lots of record. They're zoned agriculture in the county, and the county's agricultural zone allows uses on those lots. In particular, it allows each one of them to have a residence and a secondary residence, as well as various ag activities. So the question is the intent of this alternative to allow the county level of development in the ag category to occur in the city's open space zone, or are we talking about the city extending the SOI and trying to extinguish the allowable uses on the existing lots? That's a question. With regard to alternative 2, it appears to be similar to things we've discussed and submitted to your committee. And so we think alternative 2 reflects those discussions we think there's a bit more flexibility in what happens or could happen under Alternative 2 than is reflected in this drawing, in particular the area down by Lot 6 and the stuff where the shore plant exists today. There's probably more flexibility to have less development there than this alternative might imply. So enough said about Alternative 2. One of the most important things for our testimony today is to let you know where we are in our discussions that are ongoing. Basically, we have a discussion set up on February the 13th with the Land Conservancy of SLO, the Trust for Public Lands. The city is invited to that meeting, the county, to discuss the long-term future of the property and hopefully to make some decisions. Those agencies have been doing their own thing for about 2 months now, trying to establish their priorities. What are their ranked priorities relative to the Chevron property for putting the property into open space or allowing some development to happen or purchasing development rights outright or having the purchase of easements over the property. They're supposed to be telling us what their priorities are on the 13th. The city's been a part of those discussions as well. So then you have a meeting scheduled of your committee again on the 16th, I believe. So what we would like to do is, as a result of the meetings on the 13th, present to you an alternative, for lack of a better term, alternative number 3, that reflects the discussions that happen among us, Chevron, and the conservancies on the 13th. To come back to you and say, we've met with these folks, this is what we think they want to see happen, what their priorities are, and here's some hopefully workable solution, or not. If we can't come to any kind of agreement about what to do, then we'll come back and tell you, if we can't come to any agreement on what to do, let's talk. So that's where we're at, what we're doing. Hopefully you'll invite us back on the 13th. Because the meeting's on the 13th, we can't get it into your packet that usually goes out on the 10th. So it would be something we would have to just bring to the meeting or get to Scott as early as we can after the 13th. Whatever happens on the 13th, we've got to, quick like a bunny, draw a map of it so we can make sense out of it. So we would ask you not to take action on the alternatives this evening, and look forward to coming back to you if that's acceptable at your meeting on the 16th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unless you have questions.
We'll save all the questions till the end, if that's okay with you.
Good afternoon. Community Director, Development Director Scott Graham, and the General Plan Advisory Committee members. My name's Kristen Hedlund. I live at 498 Yerba Buena Street, North Morro Bay, resident for 26 years. I'm here to speak on the residential zoning of 2 10-acre parcels in North Morro Bay. Thank you for allowing me the time to address my concerns. I am grateful for your time and energy to update the general plan for Morro Bay. I would like to point out a change that will impact the residents of North Morro Bay. The 10-acre parcel at the Navy jet fuel tank property located at 3300 Panorama Drive is currently zoned as an R1, single-family residential, moderate density, 4 to 7 units per acre. This property has a current demolition application with the city to remove the tanks, pump station, and piping. The current R1 zone will permit approximately 60 plus homes that can be built on this piece of land. The general plan update draft has changed the zoning of this property to an R2 zone. The R2 zone will increase the housing to detached and attached single-family homes, townhomes, duplexes, and condominiums with medium density, 7 to 15 units per acre. The zone change doubles the number of residential homes that could be built on this property with a total of over 120 homes. The second piece of property, a 10-acre parcel currently for sale on North Morro Bay adjacent to Del Mar School, has been designated an R3 zone, multiple family housing including apartments, townhomes, and condominiums, high density of 15 to 27 units per acre. Approximately 200 plus homes could be built here. So for Panorama, you would have 120 homes with 240 cars, and Main Street parcel would have 216 possible homes with 432 cars for a total of possibly 600 plus cars traveling along Main Street in North Morro Bay. I would like to open a dialogue with the committee to review the impact on residents in North Morro Bay. My concern for the two 10-acre parcels are water. Where will the city get the water for these two newly zoned residential properties? Second, traffic with accommodating noises. The two newly zoned housing properties could possibly build 300 plus residents with 2 cars per home. 2 cars per home equals 600 cars using Main Street as their exit route out of the neighborhood. This excess traffic will cause congestion at the intersection of Main Street and Yerba Buena. Is that the buzzer? Is that the buzzer?
Yeah.
Oh. So okay, let me get through this real fast. What I'm saying is, if you add homes on both of these lots as they are currently zoned, you're going to have a serious congestion problem on San Jacinto and Main Street and Yerba Buena and Main Street. I think that the streets in North Morro Bay are very narrow. It becomes a safety hazard for people walking. I think that it's going to change the entire character of the neighborhood if the Panorama property is changed to an R2. I've lived there for 26 years. We have parking problems. We have an environmentally sensitive habitat that I have concerns about. I please ask that you take a look at these numbers. What are the steps to review the designated zone of these two pieces of property? Please take a moment to think about the parcel and my quiet, peaceful neighborhood. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak?
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Walker, 523 Whidbey Street, right across from the jet fuel tanks. I'm really confused. I follow Ed's comments. Is that zoned R1 or R2? If you look at the map, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It doesn't appear to be compatible with what's around it. So the question is, why? I would support going back to the original plan of R1 for all the reasons that Chris just described: the traffic, the water, all that's going on. I was really pleased in looking at the report about this is not the right technical term, but the buffer that's around the city limits currently in, I think both the alternatives describe it as agricultural, kind of limiting what's going on. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to walk up around the upper limit of that North Morro Bay and look at the instability of the land. I mean, it's just really visible. And to think that we would do anything beyond open space recreation or agriculture, to me, would just absolutely be crazy. So that part of the report I really enjoyed. I really appreciate how much energy's been put into it. But I need to come back to home, and I would really support the idea of an R1 for the jet fuel tank lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else that would like to speak?
Hello, I'm Carol Walker, 523 Whidbey Street, married to Bob, live across the street from the jet fuel tank site. And For all of the above reasons, I strongly recommend keeping the property zoned at R1. I used to be a real estate appraiser, and in studying land use and new subdivisions or, appraising some weird property, the general trend is to use the higher density zoning as a transitory zone. For example, say you've got a light industrial or a light commercial, like maybe down on Main Street, and then your next level, so that's zoned commercial, and then you've got your next, adjacent to that property, you would have possibly an R3 or R4 zone, and then you kind of spread out through the city in that fashion, with the lower density being farther away from commercial or light industrial, which really makes sense. You don't want people that are paying $1 million for a house to be living next to some car repair shop or something. So in relating that to the property in question at 3300 Panorama, it's been related to us as we've gone to the Planning Commission meetings that their intent in developing that is to extend the neighborhood. So if their intent is to extend the neighborhood, then it should remain R1 instead of trying to plop a whole bunch of units in a section of the town that is surrounded by single-family homes. The higher density unit should probably, if you were going to put higher density, would make more sense down on Main Street. And then as you work back towards the open space, that should be the more premium lots and not try to cram as many houses into that particular parcel. So obviously I'm in favor of recommending that you consider to leave that property as R1 zoned for consistency in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You can come up spontaneously. You don't have to wait to be invited.
Good evening, or good afternoon. I'm Tina Metzger, Nutmeg Avenue, Morro Bay. I'm curious about study area 2. It's the area located east of Morro Bay city limits and south of Highway 41. And most of the land in this area is located north of Little Morro Creek Road, although a few parcels extend south of the road. The area is entirely within the coastal zone. So you have it in your packet. And existing conditions are agricultural cultivation, it's flat, avocado orchards, and so forth. The vast majority in study area 2 is designated as prime soils. And let's see, with the exception of some of the northeast portion of study area 2. Some of these parcels are in under the Williamson Act contracts. My question is, Alternative 1 proposes that the city designate this area as open space recreation. And I'd like to know why, rather than just keeping it in agricultural. So if I could have that question answered, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so then let's close public comment, bring it back. Scott, are we prepared to address the issue of the zoning on the tank farm property?
There we go. So the zoning on that property, I think it's just a mapping error. The intent was never to make it anything other than what it is now, and that's R1. It was to leave it the way that it is. So.
Well, okay, I'm gonna add to the confusion here, because I'm looking at the land use map, and it looks like it's low density residential, and then I'm looking at the zoning map, and it looks like it's RA currently. Are my maps outdated?
The current zoning is R1 PD of the tank site, and the neighborhood around it is R1 S1. The S1's an overlay.
And what do they mean? What does that mean?
Single
okay,
family residential.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
The PD is a plan development overlay, and the S1 is also an overlay that deals mostly with small lot issues, I think. Oops.
You're out of time.
I talked too long. I need to be quiet.
Okay, so it does look like, I was looking at the wrong spot on the map. It looks like, it does look like the land use designation is medium density, but the zoning designation is R1, correct? So we might need to resolve that.
That's what we're seeing, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And the density in the surrounding neighborhood probably is at that higher density because there are smaller lots, and so there's more houses in a more confined space. So.
Right.
I think so, yeah. It's supposed to be moderate.
So thank you for pointing that out. We will need to resolve that inconsistency moving forward.
Could I ask a question of our Chevron representatives? You mentioned a meeting on the 13th. Where and when is that?
Don't know yet.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So then, yeah, I was going to ask the rest of the panel if there are any questions from the Chevron representative. And as far as the special study areas, I imagine we'll get into that for all of them as we go through the presentation. So I'm going to leave that question for discussion. Okay, so then moving on, we have nothing on the consent calendar and no unfinished business today, so we will get right to our discussion of the land use categories, and I will turn this over to Scott to introduce the people from Michael Baker.
I think I'll just turn it over to Microbakel International. We have
not
Jeff
that everybody
and Amy here.
doesn't know him by now.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Jeff Henderson and Amy Sinsheimer from Michael Baker International. We have a bit of a presentation tonight, as you could imagine. Our intent is to provide a little bit of a status update on where we're at with the project as we enter the second year. And we're now moving into the land use alternatives process that we've begun with our discussion of public comments tonight. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of that process. And then we're going to start diving into both the existing land use designation scheme in terms of the individual categories of land use that are a part of the existing general plan. And we're going to talk briefly about some proposed revisions to that set of designations that reflect some changes in land use that have occurred over the course of time from the previous general plan to this one. Then we're going to attempt to walk through all of the opportunity sites. We've allocated an hour and 45 minutes for that. We're a bit behind. So we will go as far as we can get. I would anticipate, and I would propose that we continue to approach these in the order that they're presented in your packet, but would be open to direction from the chair to prioritize certain sites if that's the will of the committee in terms of moving through them in the interest of engaging and providing the dialogue before the public that's interested in those sites. And then there are, in relation to that, the study areas, which we'd allocated 45 minutes to discuss. And what we'll do there is essentially present you with the map and the materials in your packet, summarize each of the alternatives, and open the floor for discussion. What we're largely seeking from you tonight is not any sort of final decision or recommendation per se on each of the alternatives, but rather, much as we did with the key issues, dialogue and input that we can then synthesize and work with both this committee and the Planning Commission and City Council to reach an ultimate recommendation. So with that, we'll move ahead to the status update. It's coming. There we go. Want to reiterate for everyone the forthcoming workshop on the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan, which is related to this effort. And that workshop will also cover these alternatives. So it's sort of a dual purpose workshop. What we have planned at this point is more of an open house session on the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan with a number of posters presenting some of the preliminary plan information and ways for people to interact and provide input on that, followed by a more formal presentation and workshop on these alternatives. We're envisioning small group activities that allow people to come and comment on individual areas and provide that level of more detailed feedback, as well as providing some avenues for larger group discussion and dialogue on those recommendations. So that's coming up on February the 2nd. It will be in this room, and I believe we're starting at 5:30, right? And then following that, we are working to schedule another study session before the Planning Commission and City Council in late March to continue the discussion on these alternatives with the intention of, in that time frame, arriving at a recommended land use plan that we can then use as the basis to draft the general plan and local coastal program. So that's admittedly a bit of an aggressive schedule, but it's also something we need to do to maintain our 2.5, 3-year timeline. So on the land use side, we're engaging now in the public review of alternatives. That's a process that begins here and carries through the months of February and March. And on the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan, there is going to be a draft emerging shortly for public review and comment. That project is on a little bit faster track than the rest of the individual deliverables, and that's moving forward again in February, March of this year. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the process that we're using to develop and discuss land use alternatives. And you might ask the question, why do we go through this process? Why do we break the city down into areas and consider different options for sites? This is something we view as a very key part of the general plan and local coastal plan update. It's meant to help inform primarily the land use element of the plan and the land use plan for the coastal plan. These are what provide the policy direction to help guide these changes and then the resulting physical development that occurs. And it's primarily accomplished through the zoning code. The changes that would actually occur are primarily going to occur through changes to the zoning code. Again, the general plan provides more of this broader vision for how the pieces of land use fit together, what uses generally would occur where, and some sense of dimension, size, and scale and density. The zoning code then picks up and starts talking about things like setbacks and parking requirements and building heights and all of those other more physical components. They need to be consistent one with the other, but the general plan is in essence, I often like to say it's 30,000 foot scale. You are parcel specific, you can see the individual buildings and lots, but you're not getting down to what are the physical dimensions on the ground. When you get into zoning, you start talking about that in addition to more precise descriptions of permitted and conditionally permitted uses.
Jeff?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I'll apologize in advance because I have a lot of questions, but I think they're important to get these things clarified. The second point up there suggests that the third point and the fourth point actually suggests that our land use alternatives should be aspirational. They should be what we want to see developing in there. On the other hand, I've heard several comments that we're changing land use designations to fit what has developed there. Okay, so those two may be at odds with each other.
In certain locations they may be, and others maybe not.
Right.
I mean, I think that's largely locational dependent.
Where they're not, obviously, it's not an issue. But where there is a conflict there, what are we aiming for here? Are we aiming for the vision of the community? Or are we aiming to adjust the land use designations to what's on the ground?
In some cases, we are aiming to adjust the land use designations to what's on the ground. In that instance, we're essentially saying what's on the ground more or less aligns with the vision or the future. In other cases, we're saying what's on the ground doesn't align with the vision or the future, and we need to make that adjustment.
So I guess what you're saying is what I'm hearing is where there's a conflict, the vision takes precedence over what's there now.
Yeah, where there's a conflict, that's a good way to point this out too. Where there's a conflict, you fall back to the vision. The vision says we have a direction. That direction's in conflict with the existing use. You're looking at alternatives for different configurations of use.
But you wouldn't make a change unless that parcel, property, whatever, came up for a change in development or use. In other words, somebody has a business or a house or, something on a particular parcel that's been there, you change the designation, you're not going to say, you got to take your house down.
No.
Yeah.
No. No, that's, those types of uses are, let's call it grandfathered. I mean, essentially, those are grandfathered uses that until that property owner dictates a substantial change, that's the time at which the new use would come into play.
Or the city buys it, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. The process that we're going through. We recall at our previous meeting, we went through the process of, actually, I think the previous 2 meetings, we reviewed opportunity sites. We were going through the process of identifying places in Morro Bay that may be good candidates for a shift in land use in the future. Now we're on the second dot. Actually, we're on the third dot, but in the second dot, we have done the process of developing those alternatives and policy recommendations in tandem with staff. We're on the third dot here of receiving GPAC input on these alternatives, after which we'll finalize and further analyze those alternatives. I mean, we're giving you a pretty wide net of things tonight. One of our goals, hopefully, is to help limit it a bit, pull it back to something more manageable, and then ultimately obtaining Planning Commission, City Council approval of the preferred alternatives. And by approval, we're really essentially saying we're looking to the Commission or the Council to look at a preferred land use map and say, yep, that looks pretty good as the basis for you to draft a plan. It's not a decision at that point that any of this is final. It's, yep, that's a reasonably good approximation of what we think we would like to do. Go ahead and draft a plan to correspond to it. Further changes can continue to occur after that plan is drafted, right up until adoption. Okay, am I doing your portion?
I'm going to do this part and then see how it goes. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go over briefly your existing general plan land use map. We just have one slide on this, and we do have, individual files of all of the maps if we want to focus in and zoom in on any of them during the discussion. So obviously this one is quite small in this scale. We've already talked a little bit tonight about where there might be some inconsistencies or things that we want to point out. So if anyone else has noticed anything that they think might not be quite right, please bring that up to us. We are also continuing to work on what we're calling a consistency analysis between the land use and the zoning. So we're not going to talk too much about the zoning, the existing zoning tonight, but that is something that we're working with the city to analyze and identify inconsistencies and bring forth some recommendations on how to deal with those as part of the recommendations as we move forward as well. So moving into what we're proposing in terms of things that are new or modified. And again, this is a preliminary list, and we do anticipate it potentially growing or changing as we go through this process. But one thing we have received some feedback on from the city is to create a designation called public facility. This is pretty common in a lot of general plans, and it would be applied to things like the water reclamation facility, civic facilities like a museum, something like that. You do have a school designation already, so I believe the schools would remain in that designation, but that's something that we're proposing to create. We also are proposing to take the medium density residential / neighborhood commercial designation, which is applied in a few places, mostly in North Morro Bay on the current general plan map, and to create a standalone neighborhood commercial designation. And when we talk more about Site E, which is that North Main corridor, we'll get into some of the places we're recommending that that be applied. And the main purpose for this is to make commercial more of the focus of that designation rather than residential, and also to, in the grand scheme of things, maybe clean up your designations or make them a little more consolidated. So we definitely are looking for any input you have on that. We're also thinking about, but not terribly far along in the idea of changing the mixed use designations. There are quite a few mixed use areas that have they are specific to certain parts of town, and they have a letter associated with them. So just taking a closer look at how that works now, and is that really working well, or could we look into some ways to consolidate or just clarify that moving forward. I also already mentioned that we're working on this land use zoning consistency, and that could bring up some other proposed modifications.
So can we just stop here and get input on that? That's a good idea.
Sure.
I have some questions on this. You're proposing the public facilities designation. Is that somehow different from the public institutional category that we currently have?
Is that in the land use or the zoning?
It's in the general. It's listed on page 7 as a general planned land use designation.
Is it not on the map? We're checking. It may not occur on the map currently. So that's a really good question. Perhaps we would just want to apply that existing designation.
Seems like the same thing, yeah. Okay, another question I have is why do we have a park category which allows golf courses and a separate golf course category?
I don't think we have an answer to that.
It's a good question to mull on for further revision.
We've brought up the same question.
Okay.
In the past.
Another question, why do we have a mariculture and marine research designation when there's no land designated in that category? It doesn't appear on the land use map. And it seems like that could go under mixed uses, harbor mixed uses, or harbor. There was another. It was a commercial / something harbor. I mean, it seems like commercial. Yeah. No, there was another one, but it seems like we have other places to put that since we're not using it to begin with. And the other question, and the biggest question I had was on the mixed use designation, because as it currently exists, the mixed use designation basically says you can build residential, you can build commercial, or you can build a mix of the two on the same site. And historically, what has happened when that mixed use designation is applied is we get single family residential. So what we need is a mixed use category that says this is where we want mixed use development. In other words, this is an area where we expect to see either commercial residential or office residential or home occupation residential combined. Because if we don't make that explicit, it's not going to happen in Morro Bay.
I'd like to reinforce that. The mixed use is unclear to me, and I think that we need to have definition of that we can actually apply. The way it is right now, it sounds like it could be almost anything. My main question, though, about these designations refers to open space. We have all kinds of open space designations here. Open space recreation, open space interim, parks, and it seems to me they overlap a lot, and in some ways the same use could be found in more than one of them. I find it confusing to talk about open space when we mean a park, and that's back in some of our previous documents we've seen that. A park would mean a developed area that does certain things. And open space is a different kind of limited or passive access. However, the current open space recreation says we're excluding environmentally sensitive habitat areas. But it's meant for access for low intensity uses. And then you mentioned athletic fields. I can't think anything more high intensity than a football game. So there's some clarification in there what those mean that would help me.
And kind of along the same line of consolidating and simplifying, isn't a school a facility which serves the public? Why do we have a separate, why wouldn't that be part of the public facilities designation?
Right. That certainly could be something that could fold into public institutional. I think the primary concern there is jurisdiction.
Yeah, we don't have any.
Right. I mean, part of the reason some jurisdictions separate schools from other public facilities is the recognition that the city has limited to no jurisdiction over the land use decisions of a school.
Well, yeah, I understand that.
And I could see a difference too, just getting back to the question of golf course and park. A golf course is a pay-to-play kind of place. Sometimes it's a club that you can't even get in unless you belong.
Semi-public
Whereas
or
a park,
private.
you can go picnic on the green where you can't on the golf course. So there's a part of me that sort of respects that we're breaking it down into categories that are more specific so that you have a little more control over what could happen. Because I could see restricted area with the ESHA and all was important. That's going to be different than an open space that might be a park that you can, or just an open space that you can cross and go play in the creek or whatever. So.
Well, and I just would say that we're only looking at half of the structure right now. I think that, I mean, obviously there are a number of different ways that you can do it, but you could have open space. I mean, I'm just throwing this out as an example. I'm not proposing this, but you could have open space as your land use category, and then you could have under that, you could have a park. You could have park as a zone, as a zoning category. You could have golf course as a zoning category. You could have ESHA as a zoning category. You see what I'm saying? In other words, you can break it down more as you get, as we start talking about zoning. Anyway, I guess what I'm saying is I kind of think we need to take an overall look at kind of the organization of, this, and then say what degree of specificity do we want to put in here versus, what are the categories going to be in the zoning once we get to zoning. And we really, really, really need to look at the whole mixed use issue. That's a substantive issue.
And I think that kind of cuts to the heart of our loose proposal here on mixed use, which I believe at the moment is let's use one in the general plan. For mixed use, let's use one in the general plan. I think I'm hearing when defining that, define it with a non-residential requirement. In other words, it can't be or, it needs to be and.
Right.
So define mixed use with an and requirement that it has residential and non-residential. And then in the zoning, look at different configurations. But
And I think what we're saying is, I almost get the feeling that in some places the mixed use designation has been applied kind of as a throwing up your hands. It's like, well, there's some businesses here, there's some houses, we don't know what
There's
to do with
some
the zone.
mixed up stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So it may be that there'll be less mixed-use zoning once we get done, but it will be more intentional.
That's been the internal conversations between staff and Michael Baker, because we see what you're seeing, and we've been talking about how to resolve that, and to be more deliberate in the way the document looks, because it's not really all that deliberate now, and you can see what's happened over time through development patterns with the existing zoning and land uses that have been in place, and clearly you get a mixed bag in many places, which is probably not what was ever intended. So, yeah. We see that, is the point I was making.
For the final document, as you move forward, I would also recommend just looking at this page of descriptions, group things, so that you've got, your housing grouped in one space, your outdoor open space issues in another, your harbor-related issues in a, so that things kind of flow. Might be easier to follow.
One other thing I didn't mention when we were looking at the existing land use map is the ESHA is not on there, as you may have noticed, but I think, as you know, the city is going to be doing a comprehensive update to the ESHA layer, and that will be part of the final map as well.
Yeah. And again, I in the same topic, we have environmentally sensitive habitat and restricted areas, and I guess the restricted areas are like more restricted than the ESHA, but no. I mean, I guess the intent is that ESHAs would have maybe some minimal human activity, and restricted areas would have none. Again, we have no restricted area, but that's a distinction I think could be made maybe in the zoning, in the zones rather than in the general plan.
Yeah, that's another good point.
Yeah, the zoning district is the same for those.
It is.
Morro Rock, as Cindy just pointed out, is actually designated restrictive. I see that.
Which is different than ESHA.
Oh, it's a big R. I see. Okay,
Yeah.
you're right.
That makes sense.
And the map is different than the text of the land use element.
Yeah, so you're pointing out a lot of really important things that there will be some reconciliation. We haven't figured out what the answer is for all of it yet, but we realize there's a lot of inconsistency between the map and the text in the existing document. So aside from the previous slide, we have here what we're calling our proposed land use designations. Most of them are what is in the existing general plan. So it's not a big surprise at this point. Like we already mentioned, there probably will be some more changes as we go along in terms of new or modified. One thing on this slide, which is the residential designations to note, is that there is an overlap between the low and the moderate. And the moderate also is known as the low medium in some of the existing documents. So we've worked with staff to decide on using the word moderate for the time being in terms of existing because it was inconsistent. But that is the 4 to 7 unit per acre district. And so a decision would have to be made to either allow up to 3 units per acre in the low or 5 to 7 in the moderate moving forward. But we haven't done that yet. So if you have any input on that. The other thing to note is that this slide is the only place you will see densities or intensities in the existing general plan. There aren't any in the other land use designations. In the zoning, there is more of that. So I think that is what is defaulted to currently. But we are going to be proposing some of those types of standards in the new general plan.
Yeah, that is a legal requirement under general plan law, so it's something we need to bring into the land use elements. So, for example, as we move to the commercial designations, as Amy indicated, there really aren't, at the general plan level, physical sort of intensity characteristics associated with them. We will need to introduce those. It will be our intention to pull those largely from the zoning code forward and resolve any inconsistencies in that process.
But I mean, just from a technical point of view, you're saying that up to 4 allows 4 and 4 to 7 allows 4, but I mean, is that what the inconsistency you're pointing at? And it's the same in all, but I think it means up to 3.99999 and then 4 to,
Yeah, it's just a cleanup.
Yeah.
We see it a lot.
Because if you say up to 3 and then 4 to 7, you leave a gap between 3 and 4. You see what I'm saying?
It was 3.9, 4.0.
Right.
Yeah, so in that case, then, well, anyway, we just want to,
4.0, 4.1, one or the other.
yeah, make sure it's really clear.
So, Amy, on the medium density residential, you have 7 to 15, and if you make this, and you have this one designation that's medium density and neighborhood commercial, and if you put that into one category, the neighborhood commercial, and you're talking about putting commercial first or designation on, would there be a housing density component that would be part of the neighborhood commercial throughout the city, or just in different areas, or is this designation just?
I don't know if the decision has been made to completely do away with that combining designation or not yet. I know that you'll see in Site E, we're recommending doing away with it in that area, and I think that's the only place it's applied currently. So that's a decision that would have to be made. But if there was just the standalone neighborhood commercial district, then that might allow some residential development, as some commercial zones do, but it probably wouldn't have that density associated with it. It would be in like a mixed-use setting.
So you're saying if we have various areas in the city that have the neighborhood commercial designation, we would have to have the density also listed in each of those areas, or there wouldn't just be a general density?
Generally, a commercial zone would have a floor area ratio associated with it, not a density like a residential zone where there's a units per acre. So I'm not sure if that's totally answering your question. There would still be a medium density residential zone as well.
Right. I think
separately.
I think the idea is that there is this existing sort of combining designation, and the feedback that we've gotten, I think, is fairly parallel to what we're hearing on the mixed use, which is we have residential projects. And I think the intent of this would be then to say, well, let's not do that combining district and take these properties and either call them medium density, which is residential, call them neighborhood commercial, which is non-residential, or say that's mixed use and it should have both.
Okay.
As opposed to carrying forward the medium density residential neighborhood commercial, not sure what you're going to get.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because there may be other situations to combine as well.
Right.
All we can combine now is neighborhood commercial and residential.
Right.
There might be places in town where it's more reasonable to combine offices with residential, or even visitor serving with residential, although that's a little harder to do.
And there may be mixed uses that aren't residential. They may
Yes.
be commercial industrial.
Right.
They may be visitor serving commercial and something else. I mean, there are all kinds of different configurations of that mixed use. But I think if we go down the route of saying in Morro Bay, mixed use has a non-residential requirement, we're covered across all of those. And then the zoning can be applied to different locations where you're really trying to target a specific mix, right? And you have the ability then to change that over time as economic shifts occur at zoning without doing a general plan amendment. That's one of the other advantages, is one less step in that process.
Which is very handy, because oftentimes that's not the case. And so it makes it a very convoluted and long process to change both. It's more complicated.
Are you anticipating keeping the planned development overlay?
Is that zoning or general plan?
Put plan development overlay and zoning?
Well, it's a general land use plan designation. That's why I brought it up here.
Yeah, it's all over the place in here. Land use map. it sort of makes less sense that we have planned development areas in the land use map. It makes a lot of sense to have them in your zoning map. I think somebody was, when they were putting these together, was mixing sort of apples and oranges together when they made this. So yeah, it probably makes sense to sort of do away with the PD concept.
Move that to zoning.
Yeah.
Keep it in zoning.
Yeah.
Use it for the general plan.
I mean, it makes it, again, one of the other things that makes it confusing when you look at this is what are you looking at and what did they mean to do?
And you can tell you can tell from the public comment today that people are mixing land use designations with zoning designations because it is confusing.
Yeah, unless you purposefully try to keep them apart, they become interchangeable. Right.
Okay, so just quickly, as you're all familiar with these, we've got your existing commercial designations. And then here is the mixed use, the two types, overall types of mixed use, understanding that the second category there does have many subgroupings. And the mixed use harbor is applied along the Embarcadero. And then industrial, you have the three designations, but as Chair Teft pointed out, mariculture and marine research doesn't show up on the map. And then here is a list of all of the other designations, including public facility, which we added, but may end up being the existing name. And this includes some, well, environmentally sensitive habitat, which is somewhat of an overlay. And then there are a couple other things like the PD that aren't, they're more of an overlay, so they're not on here right now. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to introduce the opportunity sites and how we have started developing those.
Just courtesy to the chair, time check, it is 5:17, which I believe leaves us an hour and 45 minutes, more or less. It was our intent to move through these in alphabetical and then numerical order, but we'll defer to the chair if you'd like to restructure this in the interest of satisfying public comment.
We could, we could speak to the. Maybe we could speak to the study areas first, and then come back and do the opportunity sites.
Mm-hmm. All right, yes, I would concur with that. That would take us to page 48, I believe. Yeah, and I'll go through that initial slide first. So that would take us to page 48 of your packet, and we'll begin that with study area 1. Want to just provide some context again for everyone about opportunity sites and study areas. The opportunity sites are largely located within the city limits, with, I believe, one exception. And these are parcels or areas that have been determined to be likely or in need of change over the term of the general plan. And this gets to our dialogue earlier about sort of consistency with the vision and the existing use and what could occur on these sites in the future. We are including sites that are both sort of what we're talking citywide, as well as those that are located within the downtown waterfront strategic plan. The downtown waterfront strategic plan itself, when it's released, will identify these sites and include both site areas and corridor areas, and align those with a series of what are referred to as catalyst projects, where we're looking at a range of different types of projects that could help spur economic development in those areas and the fit of those projects to individual sites. The sites have been selected on the interior portion of the city based on research, city staff input, and GPAC input from the previous 2 meetings, as well as other community input that we've received through, say, stakeholder meetings, workshops, and other formats. Again, the changes that would occur would be accomplished primarily through zoning. The general plan would set the direction, and the zoning would essentially deliver the regulations and requirements. And not all of the sites that we're bringing forward have specific proposed land use changes. Some of them are just sites of great interest in the community that we want to touch on and ensure that we don't necessarily want to continue forward with alternative land uses, particularly in the case of the opportunity sites. I think now, and then there's this map that's in your packet as well that identifies both the opportunity sites within the city and the study areas outside the city, which are then broken down in the report for individual discussion. With that, I think we're going to punch forward to study area 1. Okay. All right, study area 1, and I'm just going to go ahead and give you the setting for this that's presented in the paper itself. This area is located east of the city limits, and it runs from north of Toro Creek Road south to Highway 41. Primarily consists of annual grasslands today. Much of this is the former site of the Estero Marine Terminal, which is owned by Chevron. The Estero Marine Terminal site includes marine terminal offices and a former tank farm. The area also includes a 200-acre parcel that includes a mobile home park within a portion of the area. About half of this area is located within the coastal zone. Chevron's currently exploring options to divest from its property ownership in the area and has presented a couple of times to the GPAC about properties and options for the future use of those properties. And the figures and the parcel numbers that we're going to reference in this section are based on maps that have been presented to the GPAC previously by Chevron. And part of the structure of this study area is that the city's proposing to include part of the study area within the general plan planning area and potentially part in the future as part of its SOI. And I think I want to make clear that I don't believe it's the intent at this point to recommend an SOI extension at the same time as the general plan. Rather, the general plan is identifying an area that the city is saying in the future this would be appropriate to add to our SOI. I just want to make that important clarification. So then it takes us to the study area map, and we've got and as we look at these maps, since this is the first one, just for orientation, we're always going to be looking at what we're describing as the existing general plan land use first in the first panel. And then the subsequent panels are derivations from that. So where we essentially say, this is the existing plan, and then here are, in this case, 2 alternatives. On these maps that are addressing study areas, you'll notice that we use both the City of Morro Bay General Plan land use system, which is in this case presented in the second column of the legend, and the San Luis Obispo County General Plan designations, which are presented in the third column of the legend. Those county designations are typically applied to the first map because that's the existing general plan. The City of Morro Bay does not have existing general plan designations out there. The county does. Sure. And I'm going to have Amy's going to switch over to the version of this map that we can zoom in and out of to help facilitate questions. But let me go ahead and introduce the 2 alternatives for this area. And the first alternative, essentially what is being proposed is an extension of a potential future extension of the city's sphere of influence to encompass a number of the parcels on the Chevron property, but not all of the parcels on the Chevron property, which is consistent with some of the discussion from previous meetings. The underlying land uses, as you look at alternative 1, would identify that first row of lots adjacent to the city limits and identify that as agriculture, with the intention and the full disclosure that that agricultural use allows for 1 house per lot in addition to a number of other appropriate uses in the agricultural category. As we move to alternative 2, you then will see the addition of a second row of lots, also pulled into the agricultural designation, and the properties to the north and west of those areas going down toward the beach and the ocean are presented in using the visitor serving commercial designation as well as the coastal development industrial designation. You have to drag it over here.
So Jeff, the parcel, parcel 6 and the parcels that are on the east side of Highway 1 are those that are in that kind of reddish color. That's visitor serving commercial. That's,
Yeah, let's pull that up so we can make sure we're all looking at the same thing. Scroll the bar on the bottom.
looking at alternative 2, yeah.
And then you can Control plus. We'll zoom it in. Okay, so we're looking at parcel 6, which is the one on the west side of Highway 1.
Right, and then the ones across the highway, they just show up as a little bit of a different color.
Yeah.
But that's all visitor. That's all visitor.
That's all visitor serving commercial.
I think it's just because of the slashes
Right.
across.
And
yeah.
you'll recall from earlier meetings, I'm going to provide a bit of a broad characterization here, but you'll recall from earlier meetings, I believe Chevron presented 3 options. Option 1, more or less, is alternative 1 with a few modifications. Alternative 2 is a bit of a hybrid between options 2 and 3 that you saw before. So we attempted to essentially look at those in tandem. And just in reference to Mr. Montgomery's comments, I did note as we were looking at, let me just come back to this map. There was this question regarding the extension of the sphere of influence. So as we look at alternative 1, we're essentially talking about areas that are shown here in green, but with the red hatching. That would represent a scenario where the city might suggest extending its sphere of influence, but then rolling those properties into open space recreation. And I believe, in listening to that comment, it would be our intent in a revised version of this alternative to pull that red line back to the extent of that first row of properties, so that we're not entering into a situation where we're extending the SOI to properties and then potentially restricting their use. So I think that then in a future iteration of this map, we would pull that red line back so that it ran along 33, 34, 36, 38, 40, 41.
A secondary option here would be, if you were interested in preservation of those lots, would you consider moving the density associated with them to make them open space recreation to the lots that are just inside of that in the darker color? So if we were able to conserve the development potential of those lots, move those potentials to those other lots that are abutting the city right of way, that could be something.
That's another alternative we could look at.
Yeah, so there are that would be an interesting that would be interesting to get some input back from the commission or the committee on that, because those are some of the conversations I believe that are maybe taking place as it relates to the overall conservation of the larger parcel, of the larger property that's out there. Okay. Would there be any interest in that, meaning focusing some of the density that's associated with the other parcels to those ones that are those parcels that are directly adjacent to the city below? Is there?
It's essentially saying those parcels also could potentially have some development potential, and that it could be feasible to take the development potential of those other green lots, roll them onto the darker lots, so essentially doubling the potential of those darker lots, if you will. And again, we're essentially talking going from maybe 1 house per lot to 2, but increasing the potential for those lower lots, and then in return preserving the other areas.
I think part of the difficulty in this is that we're talking with, these are really very squishy concepts. And the idea that we're going to present a planning area where we've chosen a land use designation, recreation and open space, it makes sense to look at the map and we can see that. The force of law it includes is not clear. So to say these things and to present these alternatives for when? I was surprised at your earlier statement that we're not really talking about doing sphere of influence now. It's not really part of the general plan. It's something that we'll do in the future, because this makes it look like we're considering doing this now. So we respond to it now. And because these concepts are not really clear in terms of what force of law do they carry, What obligations do they carry? What implications do they have? It's difficult to respond to it. When you take the red area up here in the sphere of influence that you have drawn right now, and we're talking about drawing that back to the 6 parcels, I think you mean, that are right on the border of the city, so that in what you just said then, that would create that 6-parcel sphere of influence. And your proposal is, it really sounds like a negotiation almost, that you're starting to talk now about, okay, we're going to change the land use carrying capacity of this now 6-parcel area to have 2 houses instead of 1, or 2 houses plus 2 secondary units. That's beyond me, to be honest, because that implies that we can somehow take existing county land use designations and somehow change them.
So I would stop you right there.
Okay.
That's not what we're talking about. It was really, are you open to that concept? Because if you're not, we don't want to show this stuff.
Yeah.
It's something that's come up in the course of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's come up in the course of conversations as part of, I think, the negotiations between the conservancy groups and Chevron. I think it's come up in general. So if there's any interest in that, we'd like to know about it, because it would be it would be an alternative that we would have to study moving forward in the EIR that goes along with this, if we were going to look at that from an alternative standpoint. If there was any, like, if you thought, oh, if the conservation play includes something like this, we would want to account for it. If you don't care and would say, hey, if that happens, then we'll just have to deal with it after the fact, we're totally okay with that. What we're suggesting is what we just presented to you, though, is, hey, you could include this or snap this version back to those 6 lots. Those are the ones directly in our backdrop. Those are the ones we want to put policy into the document that says, we're placing this in the SOI because we want to conserve the backdrop of the city, and put policy in place that says, this is going to be agricultural. You can have 1 house here, and maybe probably talk about where that 1 house would be preferred to be placed if it was in the city. Yeah.
It feels like there's more protection in terms of open space, and what I like to see if it stays as agricultural. And especially in study area 2, I was looking at that. I personally would much prefer to see the agricultural designation, which not only, supports continuing with an industry, that is important to our community, but does have that very low density of housing on it, of, actual development on it. So
my comments are not intended to mean that I'm not interested in knowing about and pursuing this discussion. I am interested in it. I want to know what the implications of what I'm talking about are. And I think that's what's missing for me, at least. When you're talking about a potential negotiation that would lead to a change to allow 2 units in that area, I could possibly support that if other dominoes fell in other places. So, and that's what makes it complicated, and why it's difficult to do this in this kind of a meeting.
It's really, literally, I brought it up to gauge the interest, because if you were all looking at me like, Scott, you're crazy, we don't want to do that, then we're taking that off the table. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. We'll just talk about specifically where we're showing it here. Do you like that? Is this what you expected to see after you gave us input last time? And then we would develop policy that goes along with this SOI discussion that says specifically what these would be if they were brought into the city later on, and why we would want to do that. It'll tell the story specifically. It's not going to be like, oh, it's in our SOI, so it can be developed with a whole bunch of houses. No, it'll be developed at an agricultural density with 1 house, because we'll say that.
Okay, and I would like to see that, and I assume what you're talking about is a memorandum of agreement that you would eventually come to terms with.
So memorandum of agreement is part of our sphere discussion right now.
Right.
That's happening today.
Okay.
Outside of this process, because LAFCO has kicked it off. They're going to release the draft here in a little bit. I'm working on it internally from the city side of things. The city has to adopt it. It talks about what happens in these properties, notifications that happen when lot line adjustments are proposed in the county, right in this location. This specific figure that shows all the Chevron lots is on the map that's in the current MOA, which is a memorandum of agreement that's signed off by County Board of Supervisors, Morro Bay City Council, and LAFCO. It's existing and it's up for review right now. So that's a whole entirely separate process from this. But this discussion language could be added sort of if then, if the sphere of influence includes this area, then something could happen later on down the road or not. It sort of depends.
Well, it seems like if you include just the 6 lots and snap the sphere of influence line back to those, you haven't accomplished, the only thing you've accomplished is the city has a little bit of influence on maybe where the houses are placed. But the rest of the property is still left in agricultural. I mean, so in the county, which is not that different from in the city, so from a practical point of view, in terms of the agricultural part of it, alternative 1 snapped back and alternative 2 are basically the same. They're not that different.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Alternative 2 is actually dramatically different because it includes a potential for development.
I said only from the agricultural point of view.
All right, gotcha. All right.
So the one thing with alternative 1 is that we do have the potential to have this, agricultural area, but then also to have a recreational area up in the hills above that. I mean, so from an open space point of view, not snapping the line back seems to, if we keep that in open space, it seems the way to go. And if that involves some negotiations with regard to density, then it does. The big question, the gorilla in the room here is the red area. Do we want to endorse visitor serving commercial and that much visitor serving commercial? I mean, that's a pretty big parcel there.
And certainly, I would say this: you can tell the story as part of this process. Just like we can say it's going to be agriculture, and agriculture for the city of Morro Bay is going to mean 1 house per parcel. We'll tell that story. Commercial development in that location can be very specifically defined if you were interested in that. You could say, hey, if it was to come in, it would be this or not more than this. I mean, those types of things are an acceptable way to deal with that. The uses specifically could be discussed there.
Particularly since we have influence on zoning at this time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Well, personally, I'm interested in staying the way it is, agriculture, no commercial use in that area.
I think I would agree with Rich at this point. And partly too, just thinking of our community and controlling at some level the areas of where you have that kind of commercial development. It seems like it's better to have a various nuclei, which we do have already, to throw in basically a 4th or even 5th district, depending on how you look at things.
Okay, so what about a campground? What do you think about that?
Is that considered commercial, or does that come under?
It can be visitor serving.
Visitor serving.
What about that?
I personally, I guess, would probably think we need to look at keeping things open for campground areas because of our commitment to providing the lower cost accommodations and the possible loss of the waterfront campgrounds that we have. So in other words, as we are looking at sea level rise and planning for that, we may lose the Strand campground. And, so we need to be making allowances for where other kinds of camping accommodations could go. And in my mind, that, fits very nicely with the vision and values of Morro Bay for the outdoor and affordable recreation experiences.
Although I would say, I would like to say just one little specific, the portion of lot number 6, well, all of the part of the area that we're talking about, which is west of Highway 1, definitely has to remain open space. I mean, that is greatly used by the community now. The dog beach.
Sea level rise.
So maybe we need to, as we move forward, we need to look at either a land use designation or a zoning designation that is visitor serving but has a limited intensity. And that might be a concept that would be applied elsewhere as well.
I think that's a good idea to look into that. Part of my ongoing problem with this discussion, you're probably tired of hearing me say these things, but the idea of a sphere of influence, it is simply not clear to me how much authority that gives the city in controlling the development in that area. I've read LAFCO's policy guidelines, and it sounds to me like what is happening with the sphere of influence is that you're getting into an agreement with LAFCO, which once it's reached, LAFCO says, yes, we'll put that in your sphere of influence. It's basically got a 20-year horizon, and you are proposing to use that land for certain things. But in that sphere of influence, the county can still control it. And that means ultimately if 3 supervisors decide they want to change that land use designation, they can. So I come back to what is the force of this, and what does our choice of making this limited use, visitor serving with limited uses, low impact uses, what force does that have? What does that allow us to do or not do?
Well, it allows us to tell the story of what it would be if it were annexed into the city. The city, you're identifying, this is an area that we have a lot of interest in.
Yes.
One, it also puts everybody on notice about what the city of Morro Bay would like to see there. So it's a document, it's sitting out there. It would end up probably in the memorandum of agreement that you talked about, that the county would have. It would talk about those things. It probably makes it a little more attractive for the folks that might purchase those properties to annex into the city, because you have city services that are directly provided to them. The benefit there is they come in, we get to tell them where the house goes. Right. Because if we don't, it can pretty much go anywhere underneath the county's land use plan. It can go anywhere in the lot, so it could be high up on the lot. So we have all of ours down here on Panorama, and then county says, well, you put your house at the top. That would not be great. I mean, I don't know that they would do that, but because they would know that our preference in this location is to preserve the backdrop of the city, but it could happen, and that's kind of why we're talking about this. Right. This is the main concern of why I originally brought it forward to you was this specific issue. I've listened to folks tell me this constantly. We want to maintain that green space and green belt around the city. Like, this is a way to do that. This is a way to tell that story. Yeah.
So it's having a chair at the table, but it's also potentially making it less attractive for somebody who does want to come in and put that house at the top of the hill because, the city of Morro Bay has it under their sphere of influence, and they've already said, you can't really do that. So
the sphere of influence is our wish list. We can't force the county not to put that house on the top of the hill.
But if they don't accommodate what Morro Bay says are the stipulations for putting the house on the top of the hill, and so they have no access to our services, then they can't do it.
They wouldn't have access to our services. They'd have to have their own water and fire and police, right?
So that's
Bill Gates is moving.
that sounds interesting, but what's going to happen? The reality of that is our police and fire are going to service whatever gets put out there, because we have cooperative agreements with the county, and we would be the closest folks out there to that. So our folks would be the first on scene to any scenario that would happen out there. Now the water thing, we can't serve outside of our boundaries, so that wouldn't work.
They have to bring it in.
So they would have to bring it in to get water service. We know several of those parcels, they put straws in the ground and didn't got any water. So they'd have to get water there. They could potentially form a mutual water district type thing and provide their own water to themselves. They have water rights that go along with the property that's out there. That could happen. Right. I don't know how likely that is, but it could.
Probably more difficult than annexation.
That's what I said. I mean, that's what I thought. That seems very difficult. Annexing in to get your rights to hook into the city's water seems much more likely.
Could I just ask, if we're interested in the city's backdrop, okay, and the open space around, why are we not looking at the 2 parcels that are south of the area outlined to down to Highway 41? Isn't that, if you pull out a little bit, those 2 that are, the one right next to Juniper Avenue is, very close to the city, and then the other one.
Those are, the McIlvain property and the Rigetti property. McIlvain's got the little lots on it there. That's the mobile home park that's out there, and then the Rigetti is the one that's closest into the city.
Right.
Are they less elevated, or is there some reason why we're not interested in that backdrop?
I mean, from the top of the city over there, you do look down. Well, I guess you see the top of it. So some of it is visible.
Are we not worried about? Are we not worried about any development that Rigetti or any of those people would be doing on that property? Or if it's not in our sphere of influence, do we have any say about what goes on there?
We showed them in the planning area for a couple of reasons. I mean, there are alternatives that are alternative wharf sites. So are included in they're going to be included in the EIR process for those. So having them in the planning area made a little sense. So it shows that. It's not the preferred alternative site, of course, but they are the alternative sites that two of those are.
They're sites the city has considered potentially for development of facilities in the past.
Yeah.
Therefore, some precedent for saying they're related to the city's planning activities, which is the reasoning for being in the planning area.
Yeah.
Which is different
I'm
than
asking why they're not in the consideration for SOI.
Right.
It wasn't discussed before. I mean, I got to think I never really gave it much thought to include it in the SOI. As other properties came forward, it was, the Chevron thing's been a big topic for a long time, and so honestly, we focused some attention on what that might look like because people were asking us what can we do there? What can we do there to try to preserve the backdrop of the city, and for those lots specifically, and tried to come forward with solutions for that or options for you to consider.
I mean, I would suggest before we hear from Chevron again on their part, maybe we should go out and take a look and say, is this important? For preserving the ambience of the city.
Just do a field trip.
It's on the other side of the hill.
I don't know. Yeah, that's what.
Other discussion on this site?
Have we helped you at all?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. I think, and again, the intent here isn't to reach a resolution. And I think, as we've heard, I mean, I would be interested. I mean, I think just from our perspective, we'd be interested in GPAC's perspectives on a potential scenario 3 as the outcome of some of the dialogue between the different parties.
So at this point, we're just considering whether we want it in our sphere of influence, not the open space. Open land development open space would be a different conversation.
We'd like to hear input on all of that. Yeah.
Because I think one of the people asked, what would the impact of an open space designation be on this property?
Right. And there is a significant difference between open space recreation and agriculture. As we've alluded to earlier, agriculture allows for the 1 unit per lot and a variety of other provisions. And the open space recreation is really intended for open space and preservation. And, I think there's some nuance to that as well, in the sense that, agriculture is also an appropriate and effective way of preserving land. And if your intent is to say that land is in agricultural preservation now, or it's in production now, or it serves the purpose as agriculture now, and we want that to be the continued use in the future, it's worth saying it. And saying, then current use is ag, future use is ag. Recognizing that ag use, just as these parcels on the edge of the city, would carry 1 unit per parcel. But it also preserves meaningful agricultural use. Right.
Yeah, the two existing lots, the New McElwain and Rigetti, each have homes on them.
Yeah. I mean, the existing uses would be grandfathered in, obviously. But, if you had a agricultural lot without a house on it and you redesignated it open space recreation, you've essentially precluded the ability to build that house. Right?
And this is the same thing we're going to talk about for areas 2 through 4. So,
which carries with it a number of stipulations. I mean, it would need to. My advice would be, if you were going to do that, it needs to represent a significant effort on the part of the city of Morro Bay to secure the property for purposes, or another party to secure the property for purposes of open space. In other words, there's an exchange between some party and that property owner for conserving that land as open space. It's not a decision to be taken lightly without that kind of a backup.
Yeah,
In that scenario, retaining as ag is the more conservative approach.
And I don't think, no offense, but that doesn't seem to me a great area for open space. I mean, because it's not connected to anything. You know, you don't have access to, you know, you can't, there's not a trail that you can connect going somewhere else. I wasn't considering switching it from ag to open space. I thought it would maybe just be part of that ag band that would be inside the SOI.
Right. The other option that we've discussed a bit internally is calling residential. Is the other option could be creating a new land use designation that is more of a large lot residential that essentially says you're allowed 1 unit per lot. This is a residential use. And calling residential up there, and then calling agriculture. Predominantly the same end use, but you're being clear that, for example, this row of lots is intended to be residential, whereas the other row of lots is intended to be agriculture.
Do we have anything existing in our codes now that say that, for example, 1 unit residential isn't a 20,000 square foot house? Or what, I mean, like some massive, because, I mean, I was thinking about that with our density too. You can have 1 house per lot, and they can be so close together. You walk down that street and, wow, this is dense, you know, even though it's just 1 house with probably a couple in there who can't climb the stairs anymore.
Yeah, so certainly, certainly you would define that through the zoning code. We're going to be talking probably floor area ratios. You would apply it to all of the land uses. We're going to have it in the R1, R2, R3. Going to have it in this zone. You know, we would have a limitation to those that really specifically would be to this area, and it would tell what that would be. You can have a maximum, whatever you think would be reasonable, I don't know, for a lot that large.
It's a neighborhood compatibility issue. They're right across the street from other houses, so.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a point well taken.
Right.
No.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? I mean,
It might be a good idea to have maybe a special meeting just to address this area, because I think there are a lot of issues here that are very important that need to be addressed and discussed more fully.
Yeah, I think the general consensus that came out was that the committee's not really in favor of visitor serving commercial at that spot unless it's quite low intensity.
Restricted to certain compatible uses.
It would be a leapfrog development. I mean, it would be an island of visitor serving out there just by itself, you know. So it doesn't make a lot of sense from a planning point of view.
Back in your land use designation category things, there wasn't one for campgrounds? Would that have fallen under a particular other category, or is that one you should make? I mean, currently our campgrounds are state parks,
right?
Which, but in the future, we may want to have an area that could be designated as city campgrounds.
Yeah, we have a bunch of like RV parks in town,
right?
As well.
Which
Those
would be
things are
similar-
usually they're like that mixed use thing. They're allowed uses within whatever the zone they're in, typically.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Campgrounds might be an allowed use in parks.
Yeah, we need to look at how they're currently allowed.
So we're moving on to 2. Is that?
Yep.
Alternative 2 or study area 2.
I wish I could touch the screen. All right, study area 2, existing, this is basically for, the way that this is presented is, let's take a look. Located east of the Morro Bay city limits, south of Highway 41, most of the land is located north of Little Morro Creek Road, although a few parcels extend south of the road. The area is located entirely within the coastal zone. And the alternatives here are the existing general plan showing the county's designation as agriculture. The alternative presented is open space recreation, subject to the caveat discussion I just had with you all about agriculture. So, I mean, we'd be interested in a dialogue about open space recreation versus agriculture.
I like the existing land use.
Yeah. My question is why? Why would we want to change it to open space?
Right, it's already agricultural.
I think the only scenario there would be if there were an active intent to secure the property for long-term open space use. In other words, restricting future residential development of any kind.
Let me just float. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me just float one idea for why you might want to have an open space designation. Since this is currently agriculture, and a lot of it is used as agriculture, it's fairly intensively cultivated, and it would be grandfathered into any change in the land use designation. Therefore, no change. It would continue to be agriculture, and I'm fine with that. But having an open space designation would mean that if one of those properties came on the market, could be conserved, or perhaps somebody just had a change of mind about what they wanted to do with it, then they would do open space. That would take pressure off our aquifers, less nitrogen in the wells, a number of benefits from that. So I could be persuaded, I think, either way, but I think that open space designation might be a reasonable thing to do in this case.
But it then makes all of the agricultural uses non-conforming, which means if I need to add an extra stall on my barn, I can't do it. I mean, because I can't enlarge a non-conforming. I mean, I can, but it's a hassle. I have to go through planning commission to get permission to, those mean guys. Plus, I have to say, I think in 2, 3, and 4, there's going to be a lot of opposition to doing that. I mean, from the property owners.
Change it from
I think it's a big battle that we don't gain a lot. I mean, I agree there's benefits, but I think the benefits are maybe I think the size of the battle would be way bigger than the benefits that we'd get.
Yeah, these parcels are probably going to remain in agricultural production for the foreseeable future. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. I mean, essentially, the effect of that would be retaining this area in the planning area and essentially moving from the county's ag designation to the city's ag designation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which are not fundamentally going to be different, right?
As part of my ongoing education, I want to go back to Dr. Teff's first point that if this were a land use designation of open space and a farmer wanted to add a corral, is that a zoning issue or a land use issue? And in open space, if you have designated, or if you have grandfathered area, a farm, can that farm be zoned in a way that permits those minor farming changes without changing the land use designation?
Theoretically, yes. This area in the current confines and structure, we're describing a scenario that would occur at the county. I mean, that's the way we're proposing this, because it's planning area. We're not talking about annexation or SOI.
Right.
I mean, theoretically, sure, it would occur at the county. And even the city saying open space recreation here, you're still dealing with agricultural designation and zoning in the county.
In the county,
yeah.
Right.
Which trumps.
So, yeah, which trumps our planning area.
So then, if it's not annexed, then they don't have to.
All this has the effect of doing is saying, I mean, all this has it's a big effect, but the effect of this policy would essentially be the city of Morro Bay saying, our long-term intent out there, from our policy interest in the things that we value and want to accomplish in the city, is that area be preserved, preferably as open space. But that has a number of ramifications.
I can certainly see both sides of it, but there's also a part of me that really wants to see us supporting our farmers and ranchers and saying, we want your livelihood to continue and we value it. I think even if, if tourism is our concern, there's been a movement of ecotourism related to agriculture and farming, and the ag tourism is a thing. Maybe we encourage that a little more by showing that we as a community really support that continued ag use of those lands, and maybe encouraging them to have better practices in terms of water and soil degradation, all of that.
I mean, I can see including these areas in our sphere of influence, so that we have a voice. You know what I'm saying? But I would, because there are things that can happen out on agricultural. There are ag clusters that could end up giving us some housing developments in that area potentially, and we'd have a chance to have input on that. But I don't see any point in changing them from agriculture.
No. Am I kind of hearing a bit of a consensus with potential exception to agriculture? Okay. Any difference with study area 3?
No. Same.
With the exception of the WRF, which we'll talk about separately. Great. So that's study area 2 and 3. Ready to go to Dynegy?
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's only 3 study areas, right? Oh, study area 4 as well? Sorry, I skipped that. But is there any distinction or difference in this conversation as it pertains to study area number 4? Or is it the same basic principle?
Same for me.
Same.
Okay. Now we'll go to Dynegy.
I think there's already some conservation stuff in there. In that area.
Sorry, not my trackpad. Okay, so this is site A, and we are moving to page 12 in your packets. All right, the site of the decommissioned Morro Bay Power Plant owned by Dynegy is located just across from the North Embarcadero and the bay, northeast of Morro Rock, north of the public parking lot, and south of Morro Creek. A smaller portion of the opportunity site includes the substation owned by PG&E, and that's here toward the rear of the property. It's located behind the Dynegy property, and that portion is still operational. And the city-owned Triangle parking lot is also included at the southern end. That's that triangular parcel at the very southern end of the site. And that site is also included in the downtown specific plan, or downtown waterfront strategic plan, and is addressed there as Site D, subsite D5. The existing general plan designation for this area is coastal development industrial. We're all aware, I believe, that Dynegy is actively looking to sell its property at the site, and a range of potential future uses could occur. And a number of those that have been discussed throughout the community include, but are not limited to, recreation and public access, potential retail, potential restaurants, potentially senior housing, potentially an office park. And the vision of the future land uses for this site would be defined further through a master plan process once the site's been sold and before it's redeveloped. So I want to reiterate that point. At the general plan scale here, we're talking big picture subject to a master plan. And ultimately, it would be, I believe, the city's intent to require a master plan on that property to provide greater details once some of the discussions with the property owners and the broader community have occurred. So for purposes of the general plan, I think we want to really focus on what are the big picture uses that you feel would be consistent with the things that we've discussed in the context of the general plan vision and guiding principles for the site. We are proposing one land use alternative for this, and that's to show the proposed designations for the portion of the site owned by Dynegy as mixed use, as that mixed use designation would allow for that virtually that full range of things that I'd mentioned in the previous discussion, with some visitor serving commercial toward the bay side, if you will, of the property, showing that essentially on the north side of the Embarcadero there, the northwest side of the Embarcadero, showing some visitor serving commercial uses across from the harbor area. And then the Triangle parking lot site and the PG&E substation would be changed to the new public facility or the public institutional designation, recognizing the current and likely future uses of those pieces.
I have a quick question about the little triangle there at the bottom. And this might be part of the downtown plan, but has that part of that parcel been approved for the Maritime Museum that I've heard about for so many years?
So the Maritime Museum, there is the interim solution to the Maritime Museum is the 400 square foot pad that sits outside of the entryway to that lot, and then you have the existing boats and submarine thing that are sitting around that location. So we don't have a future plan for what a larger facility might look like, but we do know that they have a plan for, and that will be coming forward here probably within the next couple of months for submittal to the planning department and review by the planning commission for discretionary permits for a 400 square foot facility to go on that pad that sits out there. So that's the current intent by the Maritime Museum, is to do that. They've raised funds to build it. They are rearing and ready to go. They just need to come talk to me to get the process started, and that's kind of where that's going. Future down the road, we don't have any planning process that's picked that up beyond where it's at right now. So we just had conversations with them, but not said, hey, a portion of this area is going to be used for that. Although we've looked at options that could accommodate that in association with other things that have been looked at for that site, including a boat haul out facility, which is also under consideration by the Harbor Advisory Board. Sorry.
Okay. So in the alternative land use, number one, that little triangle would incorporate an expanded Maritime Museum?
That would be an appropriate use in public facility.
Use of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. The other thing I want to ask is the footprints for the different uses here. Where did these come from?
The parcel lines?
Yeah.
From the county GIS and the city's GIS?
Oh, by that I mean the section
nature.
that's marked as public facility, the mixed use area, the
So
visitor
the
serving
public
commercial.
facility, the triangle parcel and the PG&E parcel are actual parcel
Existing
lines.
legal parcels.
Oh,
They're
they are.
lots. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the section that would potentially be designated visitor serving commercial, we just drew that on part of the Dynegy parcel, so
Okay.
it's a little more conceptual.
So I'm sure there are lots of meetings discussing this parcel, I would imagine. Is that true? Is there something going on with that, Scott, or can you?
Beyond that right now, no, we know that Dynegy is looking to divest themselves of their California holdings. That includes their Oakland and Moss Landing plants, and this one. Initially, they were looking to package them all and sell them off. More recently, it seems like there might be a change in their position on that packaging, and they may be willing to consider to sell off this site by itself, possibly. And there are a couple of different groups looking at purchasing it. Those are ongoing efforts right now, to my knowledge, and that's about the extent of it. Once they get somewhere with Dynegy, though, either one of those groups, were they able to get somewhere, they would come immediately to the city and start talking about what we wanted to see there and have initial conversations. We're just not there yet.
Right, okay.
Because they need to see if they can negotiate a purchase that's amenable to both sides.
So what are the odds of our land use planning being totally out of sync with what a future buyer might want to do there?
It's probably not too out of sync. We're not going to, I don't think anybody's going to be accepting, at least I've heard this over and over again, of another power generation facility there, right? That seems very unlikely. So the industrial component of that maybe goes away. Could we, if they came up with a scenario for a boat haul facility that didn't go in the triangle lot, it could go over here, and so maybe that gets accounted for, through their master planning process, when they come forward to develop the site. I've had other light industrial type uses that have been suggested out there that could be covered under the mixed use as well. So it seems like it's anything that folks have come forward and talked to us about going out there would be accommodated by the land use that you're seeing in this scenario. And again, as Jeff aptly pointed out, anybody that goes through this is going to have to go through a master planning process to tell us what it looks like, to really focus on what the infrastructure is necessary to develop that entire site, with that, all the uses that go there. That'll all be laid out in a fairly robust planning effort.
Right. And I would point out too, with the mixed use designation as opposed to the mixed use harbor designation, the distinction between those is that the mixed use harbor designation requires that the non-residential use be visitor serving. Mm-hmm. This is the looser one of those, where it doesn't require that it be visitor serving commercial. A potential third alternative could impose or look at the mixed use harbor that would clearly state essentially in that instance, this entire site is either mixed use harbor where you can have residential but must have visitor serving, or visitor serving down along the Embarcadero. So I think there's I just want to point out this blue shade of the mixed use. This type of mixed use is the looser version of the two that doesn't lock in the commercial part of visitor serving.
But, well, a couple of things. Number one, it seems to me that the northern edge of this is probably going to be ESHA, which is not shown
eventually, yes,
at this
that'll
point.
be dropped on there. Right.
The public facilities area, you're going to have to change your definition of the public facilities zone because it currently says it has to be publicly owned, and I think that's owned by PG&E. So
Which portion? I'm sorry, I was
the PG&E.
The public facilities zone requires that the property be publicly owned, and I think this property is owned by PG&E.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Right.
So we need to adjust the definition a little bit.
Designation to include some.
To me, it's the mixed-use designation is unacceptable, completely unacceptable, because it would allow this entire property to be developed with single-family residences, which is not my vision at all for what this site ought to be. So I think
Maybe it needs to be planned development.
it needs to be, it needs to
That
be.
could be a planned residential neighborhood then, is that what you want there?
No.
Or a plan, or a,
Well, I am
oh boy.
thinking about this for a minute. The two things. One, that's why we want to adjust the mixed use designation.
Yeah.
So that it clearly doesn't result. I mean, that's we agree that's not an acceptable outcome. So I think there's, on the mixed use designation, there needs to be that proviso that this is not intended to result in solely a residential project. And I think the combination of being in a revised mixed use designation with that proviso and requiring a master plan, it's not going to 100% preclude that, but it's going to go a long way towards saying, this is, I think the mixed use designation, if it's adjusted that way, does preclude that.
And we might, this might be a situation where we might want to have a mixed use A designation that would say, no more than 40% of the square footage can be residential. And I'm strictly throwing that number pulling that number out of the air, but something that would say,
Right, and again, the mixed use at the general plan level could go to the non-residential required, and then at the zoning level, you could introduce multiple zones that would dig in those kinds of ratios.
And the other thing I would just throw out is, to me, we're beginning to look at quite a bit of visitor serving commercial on the opposite side of the creek. It kind of makes sense to me to extend that red band around to meet that, so that you have continuity there. You don't, we don't end up with visitor serving commercial and then like a bunch of houses and then here's the new visitor serving commercial kind of.
Yeah, there's a lot to be considered here. I mean, this obviously is going to have a major impact on what the city looks like in the future. And, I'm not sure that we have enough input from the community. Maybe we do, but maybe we should develop some conceptual land use plans that are really throw a lot of ideas out there.
I mean, we've gotten input at the at workshops. We'll continue to take input on this. I think when we're going to get a lot of engagement is when somebody comes forward to redevelop it. I mean, that's going to be a huge process and one that's going to involve a multiple pronged approach to public outreach to see what the city wants, because it'll be by far the largest development project that happens in the city. So just all we're trying to do is accommodate what could go here and what makes sense. Like, I think all single-family residential makes absolutely no sense. Why would we do that? But this mixed use here with visitor serving commercial, a portion of this is going to have to be visitor serving commercial, because otherwise I don't think we'll ever get it through coastal. No. So that's why you saw a portion of it that way. Extending it along the frontage kind of makes sense. That was actually a good idea, Chair Teft. I think we're just sort of saying this is basically the direction we want to go. This is all going to get defined through a much larger process. I don't think anybody's going to go, no, you don't want to have this here. We want to have single-family home. I don't think anybody's telling us that. I think people would expect this to be mostly some sort of commercial use given the location, and probably to have some visitor-serving component to a piece of it. Beyond that, it'll have to get defined through the project.
And given the fact that there's still going to be a whole lot of hardware next door with the switch yard still being there.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing about that is it'll become somewhat less unsightly. PG&E is planning on hardening that facility and moving all those lines into a building. So it'll be the footprint will be reduced by about, what was it, half or two-thirds, I think. So it'll be a third of the size that it is now, and so that'll make it look much nicer. It won't be, again, quite so unsightly.
That's good news.
But so the mixed use, though, still would allow some kind of light industrial use if that came forward, like building boats.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then what about, there was a proposal some time ago about a graduate studies facility there. If anybody ever came forward, wanted to put in a graduate program in alternative energy generation, and might even include some graduate student housing, could that be a potential use?
Yeah, there's 100 and something acres out there. You can put a lot of stuff out there. And it would make sense to have different types of uses out there. I mean, there's a lot of things the city could use and need. I mean, I can envision lots of things that could go there. It's and the interest has been fairly wide. I mean, it's been a couple of groups, but here and there I've run into folks that there's been some folks that wanted to do some aquaculture stuff out there for over a portion of it, and we've been trying to kind of coalesce these folks together into the groups that are talking to Dynegy, just so those ideas can flow, because they make sense. They were like, for Morro Bay, I was like, wow, that's an interesting idea. Let's, here you go. So,
Do we at any point want to talk about the plant? And this is not the venue, but as we go through this process, do we at any point want to talk about the plant itself and whether we would like to see it preserved, whether we think it's a historical structure,
It is a historical structure. It does qualify with the state.
That's interesting. We've what an irony.
But,
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we could get all the way down the road on that. The opinions would be so varied and probably be more predicated on what folks were interested in doing out there. I could see someone come forward, and we've had conversations with folks who are looking to buy it, to do adaptive reuse of the building. You can't have a building that's that tall
never.
or anywhere close to that.
Right.
It's there. So you could maybe do something really interesting with it.
Yeah.
But we'd have to see it. I mean, you'd want to see what it looks like before you're like, I absolutely go do that. So I'd be careful wanting to put that into a document saying we either want it or don't, because we could be throwing out a really nice opportunity or not. I don't know.
At the most, what the state would require for that, I don't think they would require that we keep the building, but they require a documentation of the building. So there would be basically a massive photo essay of that building.
Which exists.
And then, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had.
And we've even conveyed that information to the folks that have been looking at it, that they're going to have to do a analysis of that.
I think it'd be cool if
Are
they
the
kept
people
it, though.
looking at it interested in the stacks at all?
They're interested in what the city wants about the stacks. I was just giving presentations at Morro Bay High School related to the Centennial Parkway project, and as part of that, we talked about some of the other things that were going on in town, and we presented to 2 of their leadership classes. And so when we got to this part, both times we said, "What do you think we should be doing with the stacks? Because we're under consideration for redevelopment. What do you think?" And they're all like, "Keep the stacks." It was almost unanimous. No one actually said, "Raise your hand if you don't want to keep the stacks," and no one raised their hand. And those classes were, 40 students or something. I mean, it was pretty big. So each one of them. So it's pretty incredible responses, and I've gotten similar responses from Cal Poly students that I've done work with.
And a lot of residents in the city would probably feel the same way.
Yeah.
I just think to take those stacks down would cost so much money for such a small area that you gain. I don't know.
Designed with it.
Impossible to.
We just need to get some flexible tubing and red paint and add the spaghetti to the fork.
Nice.
Paint them blue.
Okay.
All right.
We're buckling down here.
B, Site B, we're making progress. The existing wastewater treatment plant and desalination plant. Here, I'll get you set up if you want.
Did I get it?
All you have to do is,
Oh,
all you have to do is
another.
throw on the, there.
So moving a little bit north, Site B is also a pretty large area. It includes the existing wastewater treatment plant, the desalination plant, a couple of hotels and motels, some RV park or mobile home parks, the driveways to the high school, the skate park, and Lila Kaiser Park. So you can see on the far left the existing land use. We have 2 alternatives. They both would only change the parcels that are now occupied by the 2 plants, as well as the other city-owned parcels and Lila Kaiser Park. So both alternatives would change Lila Kaiser to the public institutions designation, or whatever that ends up being called, basically to just reconcile what's there now, which is, we understand, is valued by the community, and we haven't heard anyone saying they want that to change to a different use. So rather than being the industrial designation, it would make more sense to change that. And then for the other areas of change, alternative 1 would look at the western end of the site as open space and recreation. This would be, of course, if both of those plants closed and went elsewhere or were demolished. One of the reasons for that designation at that end of the site is that area is closer to the ocean. There could be more potential for flooding and so forth. So having something that's a little more passive might make sense. It's also very close to the coast, so good opportunity for that. And then visitor serving commercial on the more eastern part of that to match what's going on the adjacent parcels where the accommodations are. Alternative 2 would put visitor serving commercial on that whole area, and this is based on some input we've heard to have more opportunity for commercial closer to the ocean. So there's some trade-offs between the 2, and we're interested in your input.
Right off the bat, my input would be that if the whole reason we're moving the sewage treatment plant is because we're concerned about the inundation from, floodplains, tsunami, whatever, makes much more sense to have that open space buffer and not, run the risk of putting some big commercial ventures in floodplain.
And I would echo that. For those same reasons.
Okay, I have a question. Why are we leaving that one little rhomboid of general light industrial there. That currently is visitor, I mean, the uses that are there are visitor serving, except for a storage yard for RVs, but there's RV parks there. It's already visitor serving commercial.
Where the park, RV park is in front of that.
There's one back.
It's part of the RV park. It runs along the front, which isn't included in the parcel, which we need to fix on the map. We need to enclose that. And we probably should have that be reflective of. Yeah, I mean, the light industrial thing is not what it is. So.
And then, why wouldn't the park be park rather than public facilities?
Yeah.
Why would, say that one more time?
The Lila Kaiser Park, why wouldn't it be designated as park rather than public facilities?
Yeah.
Do we have any process where you have to rent the space, like for the tournaments and games and stuff they do? Would that be why?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, we rent any of our facilities out pretty much. Any of our parks you can rent.
It's a lot more similar to the other parks, though, than it is to the PG&E yard.
Yeah.
And then
to respond to that quickly, I think the reason is, and this might not be a good reason moving forward, is the park designation currently, and staff, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is only applied to city-owned park land, and that is not city-owned.
It's Dynegy owns it. We get to keep it for $1 a year, basically. I don't ever really foresee that changing because I can't imagine somebody coming and wanting to develop it and say, we're taking this park and we want to do something over here. I don't know that would go over really well. Yeah. So I imagine it's probably going to stay that forever.
We might just say no.
Yeah, I think I don't know that that's the way to come into town and hey, we're new. What do you think about us? And we're taking your park away.
But then it might be good to designate it as park because then, there's no question about that.
Park's good.
On a more substantive note, though, I would like to ask the committee if we really are happy with having visitor serving commercial right next to the high school. Is that good planning, or is it okay? I mean, all the property between basically the high school and Atascadero Road is currently visitor serving commercial.
Most of it, as you get up, more towards the highway, it gets out of the floodplain. But once you get about halfway through the middle of the slide there to the ocean, you end up in the floodplain. So most of that area probably would have difficulty developing with anything on it, without having to do some rather drastic manipulation of the ground and grading. Although you could do that in this area because you're at the end, you can push water away. You just can't push water onto other properties and flood them. But those are some tough takedowns from a development standpoint, which is why we have the alternative, the middle alternative one, having the open space area, because it seems like we could sort of, that's something you can have recreational fields that are subject to flooding. That's okay, not a big deal. Mm-hmm. So you could have ball fields or something out there potentially that would mirror nicely with we have the Lila Kaiser Park, and then we were putting in the new pool at the high school that's going to be for public use and when it's not used by the school. So sort of playing that off each other there is kind of an interesting concept.
What
about hotels for the tournaments that we could have. Yeah, I mean that's all good. That's a good point, Jeff.
What about continuing on the other side of Atascadero Road with the green blob, so that you do have a little bit more open space left that sort of buffers that part of the high school and all? I mean,
those are privately held parcels.
Oh, okay.
That we want to be. Yeah, I mean, I think Jeff spoke well to this earlier. You want to be careful when you start putting open space designations on someone else's property. They tend not to like that.
So what are they doing with it now? They're just sitting on it. I mean,
they're floodplain. Again, the development potential isn't great for it, and it would be. I mean, again, you're talking really expensive. Engineering and construction because you're in the floodplain and there's substantial issues that go along with it, which is why they're vacant.
So your answer would be the same for these parcels that are just west of Park that there's a floodplain up to the edge of that and then not over it. Where exactly that is makes a difference, but, so are those privately owned and therefore can't be zoned open space, or is that the same
Those are
thing there?
privately owned, yes.
Yeah,
That's Flippin's in there, isn't it?
I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Flippos is part of the one of the ones that's over there. And then you have Flippos, and then the two RV parks, the one next to Flippos and the one that's across the street. Those are all owned by the same person.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I talked to him today.
How's he doing?
I guess my concern with the visitor serving next to the high school is just basically we've got a traffic situation there now. If they, all of those lots on the north side of Atascadero are undeveloped except one, I think, which is a small RV park now. But if they were to all be developed with, whatever, the traffic situation could be significant.
Didn't we have a miniature golf course kind of
Yes.
thing there? And then there was the teen
it's right
center.
It's behind the teen center, yeah.
Yeah. So, I would
The teen
think
center's there too. I forgot.
anybody who came in with a goal of development is going to look at that location next to the high school and decide whether that's, wouldn't that would come before planning commission, wouldn't it? To say not an appropriate use or an appropriate use. I think having some of those kind of more recreational things that are probably going to be used in the summer more than during the year, or be used by kids after school, that's all good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have, because that is, do you want to have visitor serving over all of those things? I don't know. It's, again, we're going to leave it on. We might leave it on some of those parcels, and we know they're probably never going to be developed because of the environmental constraints. Yeah.
Oh, it's coastal now.
Yeah, and when you start converting things that are visitor serving coastal, tends to get nervous.
Yeah, there's some narrative throughout the paper. Anytime we're proposing a shift from visitor serving commercial, it's one of those things. It's not saying don't do it as much as it's saying keep track of it. Because I think that the deal is going to be that we don't want to wind up showing a net loss.
Right, so
Visitor service.
coastal
Right, but
can
we've
look
gotta-
at that and say, well, I guess they're leaving this in the category that we want to see it in, but it doesn't mean it's ever going to
Recognizing,
happen.
we are picking some up potentially on the Dynegy, so that does
Yeah.
create the ability to do a little bit of
fluctuation.
horse trading. But I think the other thing that was striking me just now, and kind of thinking and looking at alternative one, is if you got Lila Kaiser Park on one side and you wind up doing some fields on the other side, and you can connect those areas somehow.
Yeah.
And then work in a few hotel type uses potentially with visitor serving, you've now got a really nice spot for tournaments right next to the ocean.
Yeah.
And now we're talking economic development potential. Yeah.
And I think a nice thing to have in that location. It seems like that would go
And it
well
could tie
there.
in with
that's-
and the high school is right there that offers additional.
Yeah, it seems like you could do something really nice there, and it play off one another pretty well. And that was sort of the concept that internally that we've been discussing.
Yeah. So that's another thing to maybe, that's maybe thinking about how one of these alternatives could play a particular direction. Right?
Yeah.
But you were talking about possibly more hotels there, because if you have these fields and you're talking,
We have a couple of hotels over there now.
I know, but they're farther away.
Up there, they're at the top. They're at the top of the street.
I know,
Yeah, at the top
so
of the Tascadero,
but
next to
if
the
you get
highway.
closer, if you get west of Park Avenue there, are you going to be closer into the floodplain and all these issues building around there?
I think you want to any sort of structure that we're going to put in there is going to be. We're going to put the zoning in the area that's outside the floodplain or at the edge of it, so they're not going to have much impact if they do have to fill or something to get above it. It's when you're taking big chunks of the area that are in a floodplain and you try to fill that and get it above. You have problems because it pushes water elsewhere and you have impacts to other properties, and that's not okay. Can't do that. So we would want to do it as far, to the east in this area as you can. So the areas that we have, so the zoning is pretty correct in that in the alternative one. We would have problems, in the alternative two, with structures in the area where we're showing the green in alternative one.
Well, I like the idea of changing the blue designation where Lila Kaiser is to park. And if there's some little area of green where you can connect the green in the park, some way to do that is a really cool idea. And move on.
Sounds like we're good on that one. So Site C is the only site besides the study areas that is outside the city limit. So this is just focusing in on the portion of study area 3 that is currently proposed as the preferred alternative for the WRF. And we have on the left the existing county general plan land use, which is agriculture. Alternative 1 would be if that site is approved for the WRF, which would be public institution or facility. Alternative 2 is if that does not happen, then it would likely stay agriculture, but we're looking for your input on that. But that's our assumption.
And we added, and people might say, well, why are we looking at this when it's a separate process? I mean, we added this simply because it's a large change that the community is in conversation about now, so we best, address it in the sense of saying, essentially it would go to public facility in the event that this project is approved at this location.
Sort of feels like you're suggesting in 20 years we may still be looking at where to put the sewage treatment plant, but I mean, I have
Right,
no
and
problems with
Scott,
it.
that project application includes a general plan amendment? Question mark.
This, so I'll give you a little bit of the history behind this. I'm actually, because I've been talking with LAFCO, like I indicated earlier, this is also one of the sites that we're going to be including in the memorandum of agreement with the county. And one of the conversations we're having is that this automatically comes into the city's sphere of influence if it's chosen, officially as the site for the plant. And so then would come in based on the land use designations that we place on it here, out of this process. So,
right. So this isn't so much a dialogue on WRF at this site or no WRF on this site, as much as it's an acknowledgement that should the WRF occur on this site, it would be public facilities.
And is this map indicative only of the amount of property that's being purchased or proposed to be purchased for the WRF? It's not.
that is the approximate location of what the parcel would look like if they split it out, if we eventually go down that road.
And how much of the WRF would cover? How much of this would the WRF cover?
You have to look at the master plan that's been released. It is online. You can take a look at that. It shows a footprint for it. The exact number, I don't recall. I didn't look at it. I don't remember.
I guess the reason I'm asking is public facility can include a lot of different kinds of uses, right? Besides a sewer plant and then maybe something that would be developed for public access. Isn't that right? It could, you could put other things in there, right?
Yes.
Or the city could decide in the future to put compost operation out there
I was thinking
or whatever.
Yeah, you could have things like that would go out there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we should talk about that. Well, we're looking at.
Sort of we better.
Yeah. Probably, one of the things is probably the master plan.
That's kind of a.
We're desperate to get this done.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I have a new copy and I can't stay and not broadcasting. Chair, you're the chair, Susan?
Nope, he's the chair.
Okay, that's right, I was watching you, Chair. And I'm very sorry that I do have to leave, but I thought it was 2 days from now, so I wasn't ready. Thank you. Just remember families that love Violet Kaiser Park and hotels with their trunks and whatever.
Don't put the park next to a
We'll work on that. We'll put that special policy on the site.
So we included Site D, which is the downtown waterfront strategic plan area, and have a brief slide on it, but we're mostly here to tell you that we're not focusing on this area tonight. We're going to focus on this at the next workshop, and we've talked to you somewhat about it already. It is detailed in the memo, so if you have any questions, we're happy to go over them, but we're not going to get into the details on each site. So this is the overall.
So this is the Centennial Corridor.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the next slide. So basically there are 15 things in this area that we've called opportunity sites, but 10 of them are actually parcels, a parcel or a set of parcels. 5 of them are corridors, like the Embarcadero and Morro Bay Boulevard. So different things are being proposed in the DWSP depending on what type of site it is. Some of the 10 sites that are parcels have proposed alternatives, and some of them don't, similar to the citywide opportunity sites. And then those that don't have proposed land use changes would have policy recommendations for the vision for that site, so to speak. And then, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we have a set of catalyst projects in that plan as well. For example, a hotel or conference center, family outdoor recreation, the Maritime Museum, and we've associated those catalyst projects with one or more of the sites. So we haven't said this is definitely going to go in this location, but we have identified where it seems to make the most sense based on our understanding of the setting there and the community input that we've received so far. So this is kind of a teaser for when you get that full plan to look at. And then we think we'll be more ready to have the full discussion on these specific sites. Does anyone have any clarification questions at this point?
I do have a question. When I was going through these various little pieces, I kept coming back to circulation issues. I couldn't really talk about them or think about them without dealing with the idea of how are we going to get people and cars mixed up in this area. Is that going to be part of this discussion in the bigger, Amy, in the bigger picture? You said when we get to the big downtown strategic plan?
It isn't a big part of the DWSP, but it will be a part of the overall general plan. And actually, one of your first half of 2017 GPAC meetings will be about transportation and circulation.
Okay, and I guess the reason
and
it
the
comes
alternatives.
Up, I don't know how we can deal with them independently. You know, it's really hard to do that because the use is going to dictate how people get to it or how they park near it. So this discussion then is going to be revisited once we get to circulation, and if we have to make changes at that point, we come back. Is that it? Okay.
Yes. Good question.
I would just like to suggest, having read through this, there are a lot of places in these opportunity sites where zoning is being changed from visitor serving to mixed use, okay? I think it would be very useful when we do discuss these zoning changes, or land use changes, if we had that mixed use defined in the way that we've talked about today, because I think it's very, very important that, particularly the history of Morro Bay receives about 1/6 the TOT that the city of Pismo Beach does, primarily because we have allowed some of our prime sites for visitor serving development to become residential. So I think we have to be cautious about that as we get down towards the Embarcadero area. And I think that's going to need to be very much nailed down if there's going to be a residential component in those areas.
That's a point well taken, and I think once you see the catalyst sites, you'll see kind of the direction we're going on that as well, but we do need to go through that exercise.
We had a letter from a citizen that went to the whole board, and one of the things she asked about, and she was kind of referencing rezoning, but I think it still applies to looking at opportunity sites in some of the identified places that are actually owned by people who may have plans, and have they been contacted? They may not live here in the city, but you're sort of looking at their property and saying, well, we think this would be great to be, commercial, mixed use, whatever we've decided. I know one in particular, corner of Monterey and Harbor, I know he's got plans, but you know, as a city, we're looking at that as an opportunity site where we're going to say, well, no, your plans, you know, aren't what we want as a city. So
It's actually okay through this process to say, hey, we're interested in these types of things. Because if you don't have that written down anywhere, no one knows. Well, I mean, and somebody, so you might get a better process, right? If you go, hey, I'm going to do the use that's talked about on this opportunity site, right? And so I think one would expect if I'm going down that road and going to put that there, I'm going to have a better chance of success versus I want to put something entirely opposite of what we want to see there that's, you know, in an area that's commercial and it's 80% residential, you know, that type of thing, you know.
yeah.
So,
and I'm all for identifying, you know, preferred uses because I've complained a lot about, you know, the commercial street that I'm on with my business and what I look at and how it's not a great commercial district because of that side of the street. So I appreciate that, but I also appreciate that, you know, there are some property owners in town who have sat on vacant lots for decades. That is a blight. And, you know, whether we really need to be working with them even harder to say some kind of improvement to those lots is important. But then I do look at some folks who I know have their own master plan in their mind, and we may come up, you know, in another year and say, well, that wasn't in our master plan. So concerned about that a little.
I mean, the idea is to put something out there that the city has interest in, and it's not, you know, it's not like you absolutely have to do it, but it's what we would like to see there. And I think that's good. I mean, some of the reasons why we have the development that we have is because the city's not done that.
Yeah.
We've not taken areas in town and said, we want to see this here. If people come in and like, I want to do this, we're like, okay. Yeah, there. Go ahead.
Sure,
and it's
here's
totally.
your
Yeah, I
ticket,
mean, we haven't really sort of drawn the line in the sand for a few of these places. And no, we really think we need some of these things, and these are good locations for them. And that's what we're trying to do here is be a little more forthright.
Yeah.
You know, put it out there, and you know, so there is some direction.
And most people would much rather you tell them up front what you would like to see than to make you have to guess what the city wants.
But it's most of the conversations that we have at the front counter at our planning department. It's like a lot of folks come in, they're like looking at buying this piece of property for sale. What do you want to see there? You know, and if you have something, you know, a plan, they'd be happy to see that. They're like, I can do that. Then they can make a good decision about purchasing the property or not. I mean, those things are helpful. And they're helpful for economic development, spurring, you know, redevelopment in areas where we need it.
So are you done, Amy?
With Site D, yeah. Can we move on to Site E? Great. So this one is quite a long area, so it's hard to zoom in on, but I'm happy to pull up the other map once I go through the introduction and we can zoom in. So this is the North Main corridor, and it's the side of the highway, or the side of the road, east of the highway, I should say. What is existing on the left is a mix of things. It includes mixed use. It includes the neighborhood commercial / medium density residential designation. It includes the very large parcel that at least one of the commenters talked about, and one of the letters that you received talks about, that is currently zoned for designated for high density residential, and we aren't proposing to change that, but we are open to discussing that if others have comments. And what we're proposing in the one proposed alternative is to change all of the mixed use to just the standalone neighborhood commercial designation that we talked about earlier. We also have a couple of changes. They're very small on this map, so I will zoom in on them in a second, but they're towards the middle of the map where there are some on-the-ground uses that it seemed reasonable to just reconcile the proposed land use with, and it's a motel as well as some residential. And both of those things are inconsistent with the current land use. So as we've got on the text slide here, the intent of this area, or the purpose in the vision, was to have there be a neighborhood commercial area that serves this part of the city, because it is somewhat disconnected from the area that surrounds downtown. And what has happened as it has developed since the existing general plan was put into place is that there's a lot of residential on Main. And so some of the input we've received so far is hoping that it would go towards being more of a neighborhood serving commercial area. So that's one reason for making that change, to be more intentional to have commercial there rather than residential. And at least to not allow the residential uses right on Main, on the ground floor. So that's what that is reflecting, and I'm happy to pull up the other maps. We can zoom in a little and take your input.
So the question I have is, all the input that we've taken over the last year or so, is this what most people want on this corridor?
So we've heard some input to the effect about what's going in along here. And one of the issues is if you drive down there, you see we have issues that we have development on the ground that doesn't really work. It doesn't look like it belongs there. And it's pretty evident, that we have a lot of these commercial property, this commercial corridor there that has a bunch of residential development on it that maybe isn't really what we wanted to see there. I think this area could use residential serving commercial uses along those things, and if we're putting housing there, they don't have it. So now they have to get in the car and drive somewhere, whereas they could be walking out of their house down to businesses that are there. I think that makes sense, and we're not talking a huge chunk of land there. We're talking a parcel or two. This seems to be more in line with what you would expect to see here and what those neighborhoods over there need. So that's sort of the thought process here.
It's interesting because housing, and especially workforce housing, is something we keep talking about. At the same time, in terms of economic benefits to the city, having a viable business district that supports the housing that's behind it does make a lot of sense.
I wish we could find a way. What doesn't make sense to me is the strip orientation of the commercial. Highway Highway 1 is now a freeway. People don't pull off and stop at the little local businesses, and in most neighborhoods, the neighborhood commercial tends to be clustered rather than stretched out. So what I'd really like to see is if we could find areas where we could have like nodes of commercial development. So people could walk back and forth between shops. Right now, let's face it, you go from shop to shop in your car, because Main Street's right there and it's a long way. So it'd be nice if we could somehow restructure this long string of commercial zoning into a couple of more coherent patches, but that may not work with the degree to which we have existing development.
That's a tough one to overcome because of the existing development pattern that's there. I mean, we're 95% out of the box with what's there and sort of chasing our tail. I'm not saying that we can't do that in a couple of areas. Maybe we take some going over there and looking at it a little bit to see if there are areas where we might be able to do a little bit of that.
And you've got the lots that then aren't neighborhood commercial to deal with. And I mean, I guess I would question whether some of these individual lots would be reasonable candidates for new housing that close to the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
I think was it Chabon Concepts who did some amount of presentation when they were looking at the town and realized that North Main had really been left out of a lot of the discussions, and they had some really cool concept plans for how to enhance those commercial areas, make them more attractive, more walkable, sort of extending with some outdoor dining things at the restaurants, they really pulled out some cool ideas that could make it something where instead of going on Highway 1, you'd drive on Main Street just to see what was there.
Yeah, their plans, we're still working through the Chamber concept plans, but yeah, they do include things like that, you're correct.
Yeah, we should look at those.
The property that's in the brown up there, is that the Chevron property that's currently for sale, the 9 acres or something?
Yeah.
And that's zoned right now mixed use?
R3.
R3.
It's not changed, we're not proposing to change it. Same, we're gonna keep the density the same. So you could put about 200 units there.
Wow.
But then it's right on
There's
Main
your
Street.
housing.
But then you were just saying to get the residences off of Main Street, so wouldn't that be sort of an area that could be encouraged to be a commercial sort of center?
We have very few areas in town where we can add residential units.
So you
And
need
this is a site that was identified in the city's housing.
In the housing element.
Frankly, if you drive down 101, man, Pismo's coming right up to
So-
the highway, so
True.
people don't.
I mean, it's not that you can't.
Yeah.
It's that there are inherent noise,
Yeah.
air quality, all kinds of other situations that have to be mitigated.
It's just that you said on your suggestions here that some of these issues could maybe be resolved by not having residences on Main Street. And then you got this 10 acres of residences on Main Street.
It's one of the last undeveloped lots in the town where we could get some high density residential. If this was R1 and you were asking me the question, I'd be like, yeah, change it to commercial. I mean, much better. But this is high density residential. We need the units. It's the only way we're going to get workforce housing potentially.
equation.
This is the opportunity for it. This is how we craft what goes there, and it's up for sale. And there's folks that are looking to buy it to do just that. I mean, we would miss out on an opportunity if we changed it.
Well, and in the design, you could certainly have some kind of a
And the
buffer
design
at the front of it
should
with
mitigate those
landscaping and so on.
I would expect to see those types of things along the front and not units right on the street.
Yeah.
Because of those issues.
Existing resident.
So
I'm okay with your alternative one land use ideas, personally.
Okay, maybe kind of hearing an alternative one, but maybe take a look and see if the nodes option can be worked in.
Yeah, I'd like to get some
Yeah.
information on that. I haven't seen that. I would like to see that.
It's kind of built in because, like you said, it's already there. I mean, there's already housing there. You're not going to boot people out. So.
Yeah, and you look at that corridor, and there are kind of the intersections where the lots get a little bit larger. Do kind of create that opportunity.
Yeah, we'll definitely go take a look at it though and see if we can come up with something along there. Yeah, I think
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
it's definitely worth spending the time. Yeah.
And I think that the high-density residential is essential because you're going to create demand for that commercial development.
Right, yeah.
And
that's true too.
Makes it work
yeah,
together.
so I think I like it.
Except right now, like you said, people drive right by there. I live up in that area, and I know I just stop at Spencer's, but otherwise I'm just downtown. So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we want to do things holistically as part of this planning process to encourage redevelopment of those commercial spaces to things that'll serve the neighborhood. And if we were to add a development into that space, like you said, that would support commercial that's over there. If we put 200 units in there, they're going to want stuff, and that would help the economies of scale for somebody to go in there and put the things that they would need so they could maybe walk to them as opposed to driving to them.
And well, let me just courtesy for the chair, time check. I have 6:58.
Oh.
We are 5 sites in on the opportunity sites with 5 sites to go. What is your pleasure?
Well,
And I'll just I can name the ones we have left if that's helpful for consideration.
yeah, I was just looking to see.
We have Tri-W, the 41 Gateway, the Measure D area, Morro Bay Boulevard Gateway, and Quintana Road.
But those are some fairly complex areas.
Yeah, these are important.
Right, and I think just thinking about the process a little bit, I mean, we do have the scheduled workshop coming up. We're going to be collecting public comment on the range of all of these. I mean, I think we have the benefit of your input on the ones so far. You'll have the benefit of public input on the full range when we come back and consider those, if we were to come back and consider the balance in February.
Is there any point in doing an additional meeting?
That's also an option, if we can find the room and the location.
Well, we're smaller now, so.
Yeah, the only challenge there could be logistics of location.
I'm open to extra meetings. That's fine with me. This is an important process, and if it's something we can't do with one meeting a month, I'm really open to putting in the time to make it work.
We'll give it some internal discussion about that. I mean, we do have a workshop coming up next month,
I know.
and then, yeah, so, okay.
I just,
And it could be, rather than trying to squeeze the extra meeting in now, you're amenable to an extra meeting. Maybe we come back in February and then we double up.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
like 2 in March or something.
whatever works into your schedule. I don't think we can
Do it
get
justice.
through these particular 5 in a reasonable amount of time.
As soon as you read them off, I was kind of like,
Oh, boy.
If this were study area 2,
all the ones
2,
with a
3, and
ballot
4, we'd be okay.
exactly, that's exactly what I thought.
Okay, so we are well into community member closing comments. Does anyone else have something that they would like to bring up at this point?
Kind of a administrative thing. I don't know the area as well as most of the people on this committee. I do get a little lost when you refer to locations on the map. I don't know what they are. If you could bring a pointer or something, that would help me a lot. And also, if you bring a map, please bring one that we can see easily. Even this scale in our packet is marginal, in my opinion. So, and it's happened before. So, for my sake, bring simple documents that are clear, and bring a pointer so we can know what we're all talking about as we go through these.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Community Development Director Michael Baker comments.
We do have coming up on the 31st, we're going to have a goals setting workshop at the Vets Hall, starting at 5:30, is that what it was? Starting at 5:30. So yeah, you might want to come out if you're interested in, we're going to put the goals up on the, council's going to discuss goals and objectives on Tuesday, and out of that we'll put the information together that we're going to go out and discuss at the workshop. So please come out and provide your input.
And are you still having the ethics workshop
On the 30th?
on the 30th, the Monday night? You don't know anything about it? Never mind.
That's what I have on my calendar.
That's the FPPC in SLO.
And are we inviting the federal government to come in on that one?
I'm not even sure we have an ethics training that day.
Yeah.
I have to
There's a
go back
daytime
and
one
look.
and a nighttime
And,
one.
yeah, okay.
It's coming up,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, that's right. I will.
Can you say a time for that
What
workshop?
time is this workshop on the 31st?
5:30
5:30.
5:30.
At the Vets Hall.
at the Vets Hall.
Just as a reminder, to be followed 2 days later by this workshop.
Right.
Here. And, oh, that's right, and I would remind also the GPAC that, as with the past workshops, we have roles available for you in these workshops, and we'd encourage you to participate. So we'll be back in touch with you on that as well.
I'm dropping cable if you need to.
And I just, for our benefit tonight, I just wanted to thank you guys. I think this was, it felt a little bit all over at times, but I feel like we got really good input from you in terms of the range of opinions and structures. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, then, we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be here on February 16th at 4 p.m., unless we have a special meeting in the meantime.